series of short presentations by members of the panel on their thoughts on different aspects of our charge. And the format is we're going to have them come up to the podium and speak. And I'm going to ask each of the speakers then to take questions. It's actually the angle with this setup is you can see the people better from the podium than I can, where it's hard to see people behind you. I'm going to try to manage the time. So as those questions come to an end, I'll cut you off and bring up the next speaker. And we'll move through the 6 topics, and then we'll have some time at the end for some general discussion. The first speaker will be Dr. Nadia Drake, talking about framing the issue of UAP.
Hello, and welcome back from lunch, everybody, and a welcome to those of you watching us virtually. I'm Nadia. I am a scientist by training. I'm also a science journalist now, and my job is to try and synthesize the information that we've learned so far and summarize the situation. So if you will, put together a framework for thinking about UAP. Now, I'm going to try and do this in a way that reflects the thoughts of the entire panel, although obviously we have a variety of opinions and ideas among us. So I'd like to leave some time at the end for you to weigh in with disagreements or concurrences as needed. So first, a housekeeping matter. The definition of UAP changed during the 7 months of our fact-finding process. UAP initially stood for unidentified aerial phenomena, with aerial referring to events occurring in Earth's atmosphere. That A is now defined as anomalous, which includes the space, air, and undersea domains. As a panel, I think we have decided to continue focusing our recommendations on the aerial domain because that is where the majority of sightings and events have occurred, and also because we couldn't fully pivot to address the expanded scope of the new acronym. Beyond that, there are 3 points I want to make. The first is that for a number of reasons, UAP are obviously quite interesting, right? That is why we are here. Recently, many credible witnesses have reported seeing unidentified objects in the sky, some of which are behaving rather peculiarly. In some instances, these reports include corroborating data from various instruments, various sensors. The challenge that we have is that the data needed to explain these anomalous sightings often do not exist or are incomplete for generating a conclusive analysis. This includes eyewitness reports, which on their own can be interesting and compelling, but often lack the information needed to make definitive conclusions about an object's provenance. We as a panel are thinking about the types of data that might add value to those reports and which could be useful on their own. As a corollary, to date, in the refereed scientific literature, there is no conclusive evidence suggesting an extraterrestrial origin for UAP. Collecting more good data for the scientific community to review in a peer-reviewed context will be important for progress to be made here. The second point, UAP offer an excellent opportunity to demonstrate the power of the scientific method and of empirically addressing a question using a multidisciplinary approach. It is our job as a panel to make some recommendations about how NASA might go about tackling this topic scientifically, taking advantage of the agency's resources, global outreach, and reputation. Key points to keep in mind here are that science is hypothesis-driven. Scientists build confidence in their theories by relying on well-calibrated, well-collected data, using well-established methods with rigorous evaluation and independent corroboration. In science, skepticism is not a bias, nor is it a bad word. It is not our job to define nature, but to study it in ways that let nature reveal itself to us, regardless of how exciting or disappointing that reality might be. And to that end, when we're thinking about making recommendations about how NASA can tackle this topic scientifically, I think it's important to remember that it's not NASA's job to replicate the efforts of the Department of Defense, but rather to consider approaches that are complementary to what the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office is doing. And so one of the questions that we as a panel, I think, need to center is, what can we recommend that NASA can do that the DoD cannot? Third point, to that end, what are we even looking for? How are we defining this problem? And how do the available data define what seems to be, to borrow a cliche, a very slender needle in a very big haystack? We heard a little bit about that today from Dr. Kirkpatrick, who reported that there have been 800 events collected over about 27 years. And between 2 and 5% of those events display signatures that could be anomalous, defined as anything that is not readily understandable by the operator or the sensor, something that is doing something weird. Mr. Free and some of the experts on our panel have defined the background on which those events exist, the amount of stuff in the sky at any given time, like so. On average, FAA air traffic control handles 45,000 flights per day in US airspace, with 5,400 aircraft in the sky at peak time. Worldwide, on average, there are about 1,600 weather balloon launches per day. In the US, there are at least 184 of those balloons launched, and that doesn't include private companies or research flights. There are about 1.69 million recreational or model small uncrewed aircraft systems, and an additional 880,000 drones are registered for commercial use. And these are not controlled by air traffic control, and they're not scheduled flights. So that's our challenge. So when making recommendations as a panel, I think we need to look at what kind of imprint we want to leave. What does the situation look like 5 years from now? What does it look like 10 years from now? Why are we making these recommendations? We heard a little bit about this morning from both Mike and David, who noted that many discoveries in science are rooted in initially unexplained and bizarre phenomena. So by carefully scrutinizing the sky, or however we end up defining our search space, and by collaborating across disciplines, we are likely to learn new things about our planet. That's a fact. And that's the commensal science case we might want to consider when making recommendations here. All right. Does anyone have thoughts?
Questions, thoughts, comments?
Carlin.
I guess I want to challenge a little bit. We changed the A from aerial to anomalous, as the legislation required. But I'm not sure we precluded anything beyond the aerial for this panel. And so I've just raised that as a question for us, even though mostly what we've seen, and I think NASA's mission space would be more the aerial.
I agree with you. And I think that is a parameter that we need to define as a panel.
Yeah, I'll just quickly jump in and echo some remarks I made this morning that yes, the A changed from aerial to anomalous, but it's also accurate to say that the preponderance of events are in the aerial domain. That being said, your panel scope has expanded outwards, and I think we'll hear a little bit from David later on that very subject.
I mean, I think anomalous, people often think about it as going down, including ocean. But I think what's very relevant for NASA is going out, right? And, looking at things in our solar system. And I think in some sense, I think there's certain responsibilities in, when we look at airspace, there's FAA responsibilities, there's DOD responsibilities. As you get further and further away from the Earth, eventually it's all NASA. Once you get out, towards certainly much of the solar system and out to our galaxy, that's all NASA. And when we start, thinking about things like, and this will be, David will get to this, observations beyond the Earth's atmosphere. I think this change in language lets us also think about outward, further out in the solar system as well.
Good, yeah.
Other thoughts? Great.
Did I summarize everything totally accurately? Awesome.
Excellent.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Paula.
All right, thank you. So I thought that was the perfect intro and segue by Dr. Drake for addressing why NASA. What is or what are NASA's roles in UAP studies? So NASA primarily is a science-driven agency. It's committed to exploring and understanding air and space. And this includes, as we were just discussing, the unknown, right? Whether that's the farthest reaches of the universe or right here on our home planet. In that light, NASA has over 60 years of experience measuring phenomena in air and space, in air that might be aeronautics, astronomy, as well as measuring other Earth phenomena. And this may include aquatic or atmospheric phenomena as well. And they do this using the unique vantage point of space. NASA's mission, data, and technical expertise in science and engineering may also help investigate and understand any of the reported phenomena. It makes sense to explore what new observations or measurements or studies might contribute to the understanding of reported phenomena. In that light, Dr. Fox made this point this morning, there's a tremendous archive of NASA data. These are from satellites and other space-based and ground networks, as well as other assets, and these are freely and openly available to the public. NASA research, as was mentioned, also supports a wide range of methods. This includes advanced data analysis, modeling, cutting-edge computational and data visualization tools, and these are all useful for investigating unexplained observations, which may be crucial in studying these phenomena. Discoveries and results are all publicly available. And this can be something from the characterization of extraterrestrial solar planets or the hole in the ozone layer. And these are communicated publicly through many outlets through the agency. NASA also has a long-standing public trust. This is essential to communicate those findings about phenomena to the public, and, as was mentioned several times, very important, to destigmatize the reporting and raise awareness of cultural and social barriers to doing so. NASA has a unique strength in leveraging public and private partnerships that could result in new technologies that may be useful in observing and understanding reported phenomena. These partners could include other federal agencies. We've heard from the FAA today, as well as NOAA was identified. And they may collect data that could help to understand reported phenomena. In addition, NASA has a strong record of international collaboration, which could be beneficial to study any of these phenomena, as that may require global cooperation and data sharing. And then one thing that really strikes me is that new understanding of anomalous events really comes from when we bring communities together, interdisciplinary communities that would not necessarily collaborate. And in my world, that might be biological and physical oceanographers. And I tell people to think a little more broadly. What if we brought together astronomers and earth scientists like we did on this panel? So those interdisciplinary research teams, as well as citizen scientists, could explore historical and current NASA and partner data for events, or more importantly, for environmental conditions around the time of reported events. And this may help in our understanding. And then finally, given NASA's experience with long-term missions, long-term projects, and scientific focus, the agency is really well equipped to handle the extensive and ongoing study of phenomena investigation that this likely requires. So hopefully that gave you some thoughts as to why NASA. I don't know if any of my fellow panelists agree or disagree. Discuss. Yes.
Paula, thank you. So NASA has a great visibility in the community, and UAPs are obviously of great interest to a very diverse range of people. So can you speak a bit about the opportunity that this provides for NASA to expand, the knowledge of the understanding of the scientific method?
Yes. So it's a great question. There are multiple opportunities I think UAP present. The first, as I mentioned, I think is to bring together interdisciplinary research teams and scientists and citizen scientists to really take a look at, with an objective and perhaps unique eye, what the NASA Data Archive actually means. Blend in the partnerships, a renewed partnership that's at the federal, the international, and the private level, right? So I think there are any number of pathways that people could pursue that could be really advantageous for helping us to understand what's happening with any reported UAP. The questions.
Thank you, Paula. This is Jelly Wright. Actually, my question and comment actually goes to both you and Nadia. Dr. Kirkpatrick gave us a definition of anomalous that it was not readily understandable to the operator of the sensor. And from the NASA's perspective, and for our panel, I think we have to consider a broader definition if we're talking about citizen science.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious of how we incorporate that, especially within the communication avenues that we were just discussing.
It's a good question. Not all data in an archive are user-friendly, right out of the gate. But I think NASA does an excellent job making things like quick look or browse products available. You can go on the NASA website. You can look at different aspects of different things that the agency has in its mission to study. And I think if nothing else, people have become a lot more in touch with their surroundings and their environment and the changes happening there. And so I think there's probably an opportunity for people to maybe not become overnight experts in how to process satellite data and use it for basic research in a complex fashion. But there are ways to utilize those data to look at your environment if you think you've seen something or you wish to report something. So communication, engagement in the public, I think, is a really important part of the destigmatization for sure. Nadia, I don't know if you have anything to add.
I was struck by the phrase "not readily understandable." I felt like that was actually doing a lot of work. So I think for our purposes, we probably want to come up with a slightly more specific definition of what anomalous actually means.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good. Thanks. Federica, you're up next.
Hello, everybody. My name is Federica Bianco. I am an astrophysicist and a data scientist, and I bring this perspective to the panel. So for the next few minutes, I want to emphasize some of the things that my colleagues have already mentioned about the data, particularly the status of the data that exists, and what the data that we should collect to really understand what may be. We've already heard in a few cases by a few people that NASA's role is to explore the universe through the scientific method. The application of the scientific method to discovery requires that the data meet some standards that allow the data-driven approach. And there are many standards that have been established in the scientific community over the years. I can mention one, for example. It's called the FAIR standard, where FAIR stands for findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability. The current status of the data about UAPs does not meet these standards. The data collection is inconsistent, it's inhomogeneous, it's uncalibrated, the data are poorly documented and largely incomplete. They're also not systematically retrievable, which poses a problem in automation of the analysis. So WAP could benefit from data science and machine learning methods, from artificial intelligence that is developing at a rapid pace. But machine learning and AI cannot be applied until the data meet these standards. Even to study a single event currently requires a significant lift in retrieving the data and the metadata that may or may not be available. And this lift is at the moment entirely person-powered, which means that it cannot be automated to apply machine learning methods. Organized repositories need to exist to enable the automation of retrieval of the data and the metadata, and this is a necessary premise to enable the systematic scientific approach to the study of UAPs. Anomaly detection is a well-developed, although notoriously hard discipline, and which has seen tremendous advances recently with data science and machine learning. Usually, this means detecting rare and unusual signals in a complex that is noisy and rich with phenomena that we know. So there are two general approaches to anomaly detection in the scientific community. One is the following: if we know the signal that we expect, we can model it and we can simulate it and maybe inject it in our data. So we can develop methods that are specific to finding those exact signals or signals that are similar to those. And we might be able to conceptualize signals coming from physical systems that respond to the laws of physics as we know them, but we cannot comprehensively produce all possible signals that could relate to or explain UAPs. So the alternative approach in detecting anomalies requires a thorough and deep understanding of what is normal and usual to tease out what is unusual and unlike the rest. These methods typically fall in the realm of what we call unsupervised machine learning. What is usual, maybe the balloons, the aircrafts, and a wealth of natural phenomena that we have heard of. And what is unusual, what is an anomaly, means anything in that is not consistent with the way in which those things look in our data. Once the anomalous signal is detected, it can be studied in more depth, either through the discovery data itself, but that may not be sufficient. So then we may need to collect additional data to study these anomalies. And this is something that in astrophysics we typically refer to as follow-up data. This can be very hard, especially if the phenomena that are anomalous are also ephemeral in time. So you have to promptly respond to the detection and set up follow-up observations. It's an extremely hard game, but it's something that is seeing a large development in astrophysics in recent years with the study of anomalous detections in the universe. This approach relies entirely on a comprehensive and systematic organization of the data, which is paramount, and on a deep understanding of all the data that is actually usual and known. The data that we might want to collect ideally will be collected in a multi-sensor and multi-platform and multi-site manner. Eyewitnesses reports, I want to elevate what Dr. Drake said, cannot ascertain the nature of UAPs. However, they should be considered because they may contain important information, for example, persistent sighting locations or seasonality. But they only really work if joined with quantitative data collected by sensors, as well as biophysical and psychophysical assessments of the witness and the impact that the experience has on them to really reveal the nature of UAPs. You've heard it from my colleagues a number of times. The data needs to be collected by sensors that need to be calibrated or calibratable. So we need to collect not only the data, images, sounds, spectral characterization of what we see, but metadata, the sensor type, the brand of the sensor, the noise characteristics, time of the acquisition, instrument sensitivity, as well as information about the circumstances of the data collection, for example, temperature, or the location, or the conditions in which the sensor is at the time of collecting the data. The data should be collected simultaneously by different platforms, ideally in different locations in a multi-sensor system. So some of the data that we may want to collect are images, but also temperature, sound recording, spectral data emissivity that tells you the color in a very fine grid, as well as monitoring the motion of objects, which has been very important to identify what we have seen as UAPs that have been reported. Much of this certainly can be achieved with professional-grade infrastructure, and both new and existing infrastructure to do that, such as astrophysical and geographical observatories, both on the ground and satellites. Some modern observatories in particular are designed for the detection of time anomalies specifically, as well as for the detection of objects that move rapidly in space, near-Earth objects, asteroids, meteors, etc. So those could be leveraged for the study of UAPs. There is also some effort ongoing in the developing of facilities that are specifically designed to detect UAPs, and many of those comply with the characteristics that I just described. This level of information, though, can also be obtained by the public. We could crowdsource the data collection if a platform to crowdsource exists that supports the collection of data and metadata and the transmission of data and metadata. And we think that NASA might be able to play an important role in the development of this platform. To echo what Dr. Bontempi said, NASA has a wealth of experience in coordinating scientific studies, efforts across discipline and domains, serving as a bridge between communities in interdisciplinary studies and studies across different countries. All of these can be supported, all of these can be leveraged to support the work of the other agencies in the identification and explaining UAPs. NASA also has a really important experience in data curation. We have heard about the sophistication of the analysis of the data that NASA provides, of the sophistication of the calibration that the data that NASA shares arrives to. We have heard about the open data policy that NASA data goes under. Furthermore, NASA has recently spearheaded an effort to review NASA and NASA partner archival data to prepare them for machine learning and AI, so that data can be served to the community directly and ready to apply AI methods on it. This is an important experience that could be leveraged in the study of UAPs. However, we do want to emphasize that the current status of the UAP data will make this lift really hard compared to even what is being done by NASA for astrophysical data. And finally, I wanted to emphasize what my colleague said. NASA has a great visibility. UAPs are of great power, of great public interest. And this could be an opportunity to really increase the reach of science, help people understand the scientific process, and maybe diversify the scientific community by attracting new talent into the scientific community due to the visibility of the problem. And I think that's all of my remarks.
Questions?
Lots of
Do you want to go, Richie? So on the whole crowdsourcing front and getting reports from citizen scientists, what do you think along those lines? Is it providing a set of guidelines for how you report? Is it open sourcing a set of applications for cell phones to be able to pull in a lot of the right metadata? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I think guidance wouldn't, just a set of guidance of best practices, et cetera, would just not be sufficient. I think what needs to be provided is a platform. You mentioned cell phones. Cell phones have been used for crowdsourcing, the study and detection of a number of things in astrophysics, in space science. So that can definitely be done. The issue, I think, is going to be to make sure that this platform is that this platform reaches a large enough community to really have a crowd to source the problem and coordination. Something that this could achieve, for example, is the follow-up that I mentioned earlier, right? So we need this community that would use the crowdsourcing facilities to be connected so that if something is cited by one person, that message can go across and a broader community can point their sensors to the problem, to the sighting. And the data has to be transmitted to a place that can centralize it and curate it.
Yeah, please feel free to say this is a bad idea. But if you thought about synthetic data, as you were talking, I was thinking, you know, given the fact we don't have enough quality data to train a neural net, if we were to generate synthetic data based on the information we do have and then filling out the other characteristics as we might guess, does that then help us train something to iterate an AI to be able to find other correlations within data as we get it?
So we do it all the time in data science, right? We do generate data sets where the data sets are sparse or scarce, and we cannot train machine learning models. It's a risky business because in the data that we generate, we embed the bias that we have. So we embed our thinking about the data, the way in which we think the data looks and the way in which they think the anomalies look. So particularly in anomaly detection, it is a very difficult thing to do to try to make sure that you don't bias your models to what you know.
I want to come back to this topic of anomaly discussion in our general discussion. We're sort of starting to run a little late, so want to cut off questions now, but we do have a little time later at the end. So don't forget your questions, bring them up again in discussion, and we'll talk more later. Great. So David's our next speaker.
All right, good afternoon. My name is David Grinspoon. I'm a planetary scientist and astrobiologist and I'm going to talk for just a couple of minutes about how observations beyond Earth are relevant to our study of UAPs. Many of NASA's missions are, at least in part, focused on answering the question of whether life exists beyond Earth. Astrobiology is the study of the origin, evolution, distribution, and future of life in the universe. As part of this, we consider how to search for biosignatures, observations we can make of other planets which might betray the presence of life. So we look for things like anomalous gases in the atmospheres of planets and other anomalies which may possibly reveal the presence of life. When we discover such an anomaly, we don't conclude that we've discovered life. We seek more data to understand what we're seeing, and often this leads to other new discoveries. Similarly, we can talk about looking for technosignatures, observations we can make which might reveal the presence of technological activity somewhere else. NASA is also supporting some research studying technosignatures. While there is at present no evidence we're aware of suggesting an extraterrestrial source for UAPs, these existing NASA programs are relevant to the question of UAPs in at least two ways. First, researchers in astrobiology and SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, have focused for many years on techniques and methods for identifying anomalous signatures and determining if they have mundane natural explanations, as opposed to revealing unknown biological or even technological activity. The SETI community has expertise and methodologies for determining whether a potential technosignature is in fact a natural phenomenon or misinterpreted terrestrial technology. When a possible technosignature is observed, we ask, is it a real signal? Is it a known or unknown natural phenomena? Must it be technological? Is it known terrestrial technology? So these scientific communities have relevant experience in determining and communicating about whether observations which first appear to reveal extraordinary evidence actually justify making extraordinary claims. Second, if we do acknowledge an extraterrestrial source, however unlikely, as one possibility for UAPs, then these objects must have traveled through the solar system to get here. Within the scientific community, there's a widespread, but by no means universal belief that there are extraterrestrial civilizations. And we have a well-developed rationale. There's a lot of literature for discussing this, which I won't go into now in the interest of brevity, but it has to do with the vast numbers of exoplanets and the timescales of evolution and the possibility of convergent evolution on different planets leading to somewhat similar outcomes. It's a fascinating subject, but the relevant point here is that the same rationale which supports the idea that extraterrestrial civilizations may exist and may be detectable also supports the idea that finding extraterrestrial artifacts in our own solar system is at least plausible. NASA is the lead agency for solar system exploration. It already has an active program of detecting objects in our solar neighborhood using both ground-based and space-based facilities. And it could leverage those capabilities to search for objects in space with anomalous motion, anomalous trajectories, unusual light curves, anomalous spectral signatures, or other characteristics. Most of the solar system has not been searched for artifacts or anomalies, and these modest data analysis efforts could potentially be applied to existing and planned planetary missions. The galaxy does not stop at the edge of the solar system, and the solar system does not stop at the top of the Earth's atmosphere. It's all a continuum of possibilities worthy of investigation. If NASA applies the same rigorous methodology toward UAPs that it applies to the study of possible life elsewhere, then we stand to learn something new and interesting, whatever the ultimate explanation is of those phenomena. And that's all I wanted to say right now.
We have time for one or two comments or questions or thoughts.
Yeah, thank you for that. You know, it struck me while you were speaking about biosignatures that we do a lot of that type of analysis, right, and our home planet in different capacities. And so it's more of a comment, but I wondered your thoughts on, you know, bringing together those communities that might not work together and whether that would aid in, you know, not only establishing what's normal, but you know, enabling the detection or maybe the understanding explanation of a UAP if reported.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, the focus of my talk was observations elsewhere, but in fact, most of what the field of astrobiology has to study is here on Earth because our conservations. So, any area or any suggestions for collaboration between those communities would be very valuable.
So of course, NASA hasn't been researching the technosignature field for very long, and there's been a stigma with technosignatures for many decades. Are there any lessons learned we can impose?
No podemos detectar cuando se trata de estos sistemas. Siguiente. Esto es solo para darles una representación gráfica de dónde están ubicados nuestros sensores. Los globos que ven en rosa, en verde y en azul representan la ubicación de nuestros radares. Los puntos rojos con letras representan radares de largo alcance que se utilizan en el contexto desde la perspectiva del tráfico aéreo para fines de defensa nacional. Y los demás están ubicados en el perímetro del país. Debo destacar que esto solamente refleja nuestro sistema fundamental, los sistemas de corto alcance, de largo alcance. En Alaska, en el Caribe, esos no aparecen acá. No lo consideré necesario para entender el proceso. Y también debo destacar que en esta gráfica y gráficas subsiguientes no estamos hablando de sistemas confidenciales en operación. Siguiente.
Heard from the FAA about a cooperative and non-cooperative. That with technosignatures, we're looking. There's more of an emphasis on finding technology that is not necessarily intended to signal us, but just sort of doing what technology does and finding ways to, so it's not looking for signals as much. And in that domain, we have not necessarily been collecting information for that long. But your point is well taken that there are lessons learned from certainly the astrobiology and the sort of classical SETI field where we've had a lot of data, and we could look at how that is analyzed and try to collect the data for UAPs that will be amenable to that same sort of analysis.
Great, thank you. Carlin's next.
Hello, everybody. I'm Carlin Toner. I'm an aerospace engineer. It really struck me when Dr. Drake opened up this afternoon and talked about this really small needle in a really big haystack that we're looking for. And I'm going to talk to you about reporting, a theme that we've heard a lot. How can we make that haystack smaller and that needle bigger? So reporting of UAP events has received a lot of attention recently, but I think that there are still barriers for people to report. How or where should they report? Will someone take action on their report? Will the reporter be believed, or will they be shamed? We've heard over the course of our fact-finding that many scientists and aviators consider the study of UAPs to be fringe at best. So this suggests there's a significant negative stigma associated with reporting or even researching such phenomena. That said, by encouraging military aviators to disclose anomalies that they've seen or detected, the Department of Defense is receiving many more reports. I think in the time that we've been looking at this topic, growing from an ODI report that was something like 500 to, I think this morning we heard something like 800 now, so that's accelerating. And DoD will soon also mandate, if not already, reporting by pilots, which will even grow that set. I would propose to this panel that NASA can help make it safer for researchers to explore data in the civil airspace domain simply by starting that work internally. NASA could look at how civil anomaly data is shared, study how to incentivize reporting, assess the possibility of crowdsourcing data, which I think we've heard a bit about this afternoon, or sponsor and participate in conferences on UAP detection. Our team has really only seen, I'd say, a few unclassified images of UAP, which lack the contextual data that's needed to understand their true nature. And I believe we've heard a single firsthand account from a former military aviator. So one of my colleagues, Josh, has an example to show just why it would be important for NASA to also help shape how the data and information is reported. But before I turn the mic over to Josh, I want to make a recommendation to my fellow panelists that we consider advising NASA to more fully assess the cultural and social barriers to studying and reporting UAP, and for NASA to implement a plan to leverage its brand image to start removing these obstacles.
Okay, Josh, why don't you go up and then we'll take discussion after your presentation.
So you can call it my slide deck if you want. Thank you. So it's not the charge of our panel to evaluate UAP evidence, but part of our statement of task is to assess the scientific analysis techniques that are available. You don't have to start it just yet, and and how we might use them to determine physical constraints on UAP. The UAP reports with the most detailed contextual information are the ones from the Navy aviators, and they're using a combination of ranging and infrared imaging information. And for these cases, we can directly calculate critical parameters of a UAP, such as altitude and velocity, under certain assumptions. And it's, the main point I want to make here is that this multi-sensor approach is absolutely critical to charting a path forward for UAP investigations, and that pertains to NASA as well. So I'm going to provide one example here just to illustrate the crucial role of science and scientific analysis, and the role of scientific analysis to avoid misinterpretation in some sense. Next build. Just hit space. Yeah, okay, so this is, this video was recorded by pilots deployed from the aircraft carrier USS Theodore Roosevelt in 2015. The example has been given the nickname "Go Fast" because it gives an impression of an object moving very rapidly against the ocean surface. And the question is this impression correct? And if not, what can we say quantitatively about what that object is doing in kind of Earth-centered coordinate system? Fortunately, the information needed to determine the altitude and velocity of this object is contained on the display. So go ahead and next. And this includes the elevation angle of the camera, the azimuth angle of the camera, the target range in nautical miles, aircraft altitude, the time reference in seconds, indicated airspeed in knots, This information in this video in particular has been discussed quite a bit on the web. So let's begin with the object altitude. Next, please. So knowing the jet's altitude and the bearing to the target, we can apply basic trigonometry to figure out where that object is in altitude space. And it turns out to be, provided the range information is accurate, which can have some uncertainties associated with it, but the object appears to be at about 13,000 feet. An important aspect of this here is that it's sort of midway between the jet and the ocean. So it's the ocean that looks like it's right behind it is actually 4.2 miles away. And this is our first indication that some or most of the motion that we observe, the apparent motion of the object, is in fact due to the rapid motion of the sensing platform, which is about 430 miles per hour in this case. But we don't have to guess about this. So we have enough information on this display to actually reconstruct the encounter. Go to the next slide, please. And so this is what this is. This is using additional information on the screen, including the time axis. And so we know that this aircraft is banking about 15 degrees left, and you can compute through a simple calculator the approximate radius of curvature of the flight. And the bottom line is, I won't go into detail here, but if you can get the bearing and range to the target at two locations with known separation in time, you can figure out how far it moved. And in this case, this object moved about 390 meters in 22 seconds. And that corresponds to a velocity of just 40 miles per hour. And so that's a velocity that's consistent with wind speeds at 13,000 feet. So it's not our task to conjecture what this object is, but it's an example that illustrates the type of data needed to determine critical parameters that will help us identify such objects going forward. In addition to the importance of quantitative analysis, this example also serves to illustrate the kind of cognitive bias we have to contend with for UAPs recorded from unfamiliar perspectives. And Sean Kirkpatrick showed another example of that. This is a parallax effect case. Thank you. Any questions?
Thanks. Actually, before we have questions, this is actually a good moment. Sean had wanted to comment on one of the questions. If we bring Sean up and then take questions for everybody or more discussion.
Thanks. That was actually very helpful for everyone, I'm sure. Just one piece of clarification on the video that we showed. The second one that was the newly released one had the 3 aircraft in it. The question was asked about if it was a stabilized background against which the jitter was showing. I am not 100% certain of that answer. It might just be a bunch of dust on that sensor, but let me go back and get you a more fulsome answer. It is either stabilized background or it's just garbage. But in either event, the 3 aircraft are jittering because of the platform. But that's another example of exactly what you're saying, right? It's the perception of the operator who thinks it's doing something else when it's actually just your own camera. Right.
Yeah, if I could just, Sean, in your event, it seemed to me that what you mean by jitter in this case is the plane is actually making motions that are causing a parallax.
So it's actually more than that. So the plane will move and that'll cause the parallax that you just showed. But the sensor itself, a lot of these cameras are in gimbals. For those of you not certain what a gimbal is, it's the thing that your cameras sit on, your telescopes sit on, it moves it around in different directions. Those can sometimes be stabilized, in which case they damp out the motion of the platform. And in other cases, they're not, and they jump around. And so what you're actually seeing in that video is what we call jitter of the sensor against the platform. So the platform's moving and the sensor is moving. It's not a stabilized against the target. But once it's collected, sometimes in processing, the background is stabilized frame to frame, just like some of those TikTok videos you see, right? Same idea.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in here. I think make a couple of comments to just follow up on what Josh said. In my experience of flying, over 15,000 hours, 30-something years in airplanes and both in space, and the environment that we fly in, space or an atmospheric flight, very, very conducive to optical illusions. So I get it why these pilots would look at that go fast video and think it was going really, really fast. I remember one time I was flying in the warning areas off of Virginia Beach, military operating area there. And my Rio thought, the guy that sits in the back of the Tomcat, was convinced we flew by a UFO. So I didn't see it. We turned around. We went to go look at it. It turns out it was Bart Simpson, a balloon. Oftentimes in space, I would see things and I was like, oh, that's really not behaving like it should. It doesn't have the trajectory of a satellite or a planet on the back of the star field. And every single time when I would look at it long enough, I would realize that it was atmospheric lensing. It was the fact that what I was looking at was actually flying behind the atmosphere. And because of variations in the atmosphere, it made the trajectory look like it wasn't going in a straight line. It was going like this, and it would go like that, and it would turn in the other direction. Was always the case. My brother, Mark Kelly, a former NASA astronaut, and also now a U.S. Senator, I was with him for dinner last night, and he shared a story with me again that he had shared years ago, but I had kind of forgotten about it. And I think it's worth sharing. And that is when he was the commander of STS-124, I think it was, in 2008, they were getting ready to close the payload bay doors of the space shuttle. And before they do that, you got to make sure nothing interferes with the doors, because if the doors don't close properly, the space shuttle can't re-enter the atmosphere. It would come apart. It's part of the structural integrity of the vehicle. So they see something in the payload bay, and they thought it was a tool, maybe a bolt. They couldn't quite figure it out. They were potentially going to have to go and do a spacewalk to retrieve it. But before they did that, my brother grabbed the camera. They took a picture of it. And when they blew up the picture, they realized that this is not a bolt or a tool in the payload bay. It was actually the International Space Station that was 80 miles away. I mean, that's just a really good example of how this environment we operate in is so conducive to optical illusions. Oftentimes, guys fly into the water. And there are cases where, pilots have rendezvoused on a buoy because they thought that was their wingman. It's just very, very challenging environment to work in, especially at night. And in my experience, the sensors kind of have the same issues as the people's eyeballs.
So per what Scott just said, I think we need to take it as an action to investigate unidentified animated phenomena to go after Bart Simpson. I think what Josh and Scott said is very, very helpful and shows why we need multiple sources of data. Were there radar hits? Were there other sightings? Unless we can look at this from a holistic perspective, it's very difficult to draw conclusions. And relative to stigma, and I appreciate the reports that our colleagues gave, I think there's plenty of stigma right here in this building. And I'm sure, Dan, you suffered from it at times. And I just want to commend Administrator, although who's always be Senator Nelson to me, for his leadership and candidly courage in getting NASA to tackle this issue. And as we look at what Sean had articulated, that what he wants NASA to do, as we look at the recommendations for reporting and how we need to collate that reporting, I'm very concerned that this could be effectively done on an ad hoc basis. And I've been a part of far too many panels and studies that end up sitting on the shelf. I don't want this to be one of those exercises. And we can discuss this further, but I would call for and recommend a permanent office within NASA to support this activity, albeit likely a modest one, but to collate this information, to collate that data, to archive the information, and act as the open, forward-facing counterpart to Sean and AARO. I think then we could continue and actually accomplish the reporting, the stigma issues that have been raised, and we could do so in a relatively affordable fashion. Because again, I don't want all of our work to end up being in vain.
Good. So now Jen's going to turn to our charge. And you know, as a panel, when we were convened with a set of questions that we were charged to address, we've been addressing them through the topics we've talked about and through things as we've been thinking this through. But we're going to organize the next part of the discussion with Jen presenting these things. And this is also a chance to get into some of the discussion phase, because we can look at each of these questions as the topics that we want to make sure we address as part of the report. Jen.
Thanks, David. And I want to thank the panelists all for all of your work, all of the knowledge that I've gained from each of you through this time. I took it upon myself in preparing for today's meeting to draft a statement that answers the 8 questions that we were provided at the beginning of the last summer when the panel was created. So I'm going to read the question out loud. I'm going to read my statement, and I'm going to pause, let you think and reflect. And if there's, remember, this isn't all of the details associated with each of these answers, right? This is to be a kind of high level, make sure we've got the major points there. And this is an initial take for these answers. So the first question goes, what types of scientific data currently collected and archived by NASA or other civilian government entities should be synthesized and analyzed prior to potentially shed light on the nature and origins of UAP? So the panel reviewed data sources, analytic tools, data architectures from NASA, NOAA, FAA, Commerce, and others. The data that we recognize were not collected for the purpose of identifying UAP, which leaves bias in the data that was collected. Even though there is an immense amount of data available, it is hard to access, and the sensors that were used were not well calibrated for identifying anomalous phenomena. No questions. Moving forward. Question number 2. I kind of feel like Jeopardy. What types of scientific data currently collected and held by nonprofits and companies should be synthesized and analyzed to potentially shed light on the nature and origins of UAP? Many organizations exist to track sightings of anomalous phenomena in the Earth's atmosphere, both nonprofit, for-profit, and otherwise. The study panel concluded that much of the inputs collected by these organizations are not considered scientific data in nature, and that they do not contain unbiased information, they're not repeatable, and they typically come with eyewitness accounts, which we've heard even today, that there's hesitations with using only eyewitness accounts to recognize or identify UAP. To the point about commercial or companies, there are a lot of space companies that some lobbied hard to get in to present to us. They have troves of data, but they're collected for a variety of different purposes than the purpose of UAP. And those systems, while they are well calibrated, are only one source of many that could be used. And questions, comments, concerns? Yes, Carlin.
I'll bite on that one, Jen. You know, I think your answer is correct as to what we've seen, but where I would go is if we made a recommendation to NASA that, you know, we're really asking them to build a roadmap, and we haven't done a robust cataloging. We've looked at sources, mentioned sources that we think might be relevant, but perhaps a more robust effort cataloging would be a good modest start.
That's good. I will only in slight defense of trying to answer the exact question as posed to the panel rather than trying to add recommendations at this point. But yes, point well taken. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the data sets that we just learned about, heard more about today and thinking about sort of calibrating things is the FAA data on anomalous, tracking events, right? And I think this is something where if we had, some imaging software, people, citizen scientists with cell phone cameras identify some event that looks interesting, one of the places you'd like to be able to turn is the FAA data. And having, if there is, to go back to, having a NASA responsibility for data, NASA might, has a lot of experience in serving as a clearinghouse for data from across the government for civilian data, right? This is something we do in lots of different areas. And I think there are some opportunities with data sets there. And I think the radar data is one that comes to mind as one we don't want to forget about as an available data set.
Yeah, absolutely. Question 3, I think, goes more towards the recommendations of what other types of scientific data should be collected by NASA to enhance the potential for developing an understanding of the nature and origins of UAP. So we've heard now from 2 of the panelists on some of the information that should be collected or the way that some of that data should be organized in a manner to make it available for people to analyze that information. And the only other thoughts that I had here was really recognizing the difference in the sensor thresholds, right? So we can't always tune a sensor all the way to the resolution that we might need or we might want. And as we collect that data, to recognize for the scientists that are doing those analyses the bounds of each of the systems that they're using.
What strikes me on that one, when you were reading the answer, the proposed answer, was what may be new, may be something that's new to NASA in the sense of like a time series, so we can know what's normal, so we can perhaps identify what's not normal or anomalous, right? So I'm not sure to what extent it's like the most unsexy thing to sell on the face of the planet, right, is making consistent long-term observations. But I think that the agency may be set up to do just that for multiple reasons, right?
Yeah, persistent data collection.
The agency does that in a lot of cases for astrophysical purposes. So the infrastructure, of course, pointing up and pointing at a different distance, but the infrastructure for collecting this kind of data, organizing and keeping it, and that does exist.
Yeah, and there are, in their defense, a lot of satellite companies that are doing that persistent collection as well. Okay. Question 4, which scientific analysis techniques currently in production could be employed to assess the nature and origins of UAP? Which types of analysis techniques should be developed? So this is a 2-part with what exists today and what should be. So we're looking also at recommendations. Based on the information provided by the presenters to the panel, there are very few credible analysis techniques available that currently exist to assess the nature and origins of UAP. The onset of artificial intelligence and automated analysis techniques give promise to being able to do that in the future.
I wanted to add something to that, perhaps, which is that really to design the analysis, you need to know what the data looks like, right?
Yes.
So, we can't really say what kind of analysis should be created on the hypothetical data that we're recommending should be collected in some,
Right.
somewhat specified fashion.
If it's all hypothetical and we want to
Right.
collect all of this data and we know what format it's going to be in, we can design analysis techniques around it.
And at that point, it's likely that there are analysis techniques that already exist. There's
Absolutely.
a wealth of anomaly detection work. We just don't know which one will be most suitable because the data as it should be doesn't exist yet.
Correct.
She said exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah, and that's what I was getting at with my point. Not that those analysis techniques don't exist in the scientific community, just that they're not being applied to this problem set right now, and it's hard to apply them when we don't have the known data of what would go into those. David?
Yeah, I think something we want to stress here is the importance of uniform data
Yes.
in the way it's collected, because particularly when you're looking for outliers, if you have data coming from many different observing techniques, right, and just having a uniform set of cameras, a uniform set of detectors, so you understand and characterize them, right? Because this is a needle in the haystack problem. And, every camera, I mean, I'd mentioned in the opening session, ghosting in optics.
Yes.
That's going to be different in every different detector, right? And before we get to the analysis techniques, we want to make sure we design the data collection so that the analysis techniques can effectively be used on it.
Right.
David, can I take a slight issue with that, which is, it sounds like you're implying that you need a single way of collecting the data. I'd argue it's really, you need to understand the various ways in which you're collecting the data and you're able to cross-calibrate across those different approaches. Because I seriously doubt that there is a single detector.
I think a handful of ways so that you're well characterized. Things need to be well characterized to be useful, I guess is the way I would state it. And it takes time and energy to well characterize things. So that's I think the challenge.
So following up on both your points, I think it's where we can actually apply artificial intelligence. So we cannot apply artificial intelligence on the current data, but we can apply artificial intelligence in a way that we can design characteristics for the data that we need and how we can collect the data that we need. So
this is probably more of a frustration than anything else, so I don't know how helpful it'll be, but I think we're not looking for a needle in a haystack. We're looking for an anomaly in a haystack. We don't even know that we're looking for a needle. That
it's just a discolored piece of hay.
Well, I'm from Montana, so I love good hay analogy. I don't know what the phenomenology is that we're looking for. We say anomalous. Again, this question earlier, what does that mean? Anomalous acceleration? Like, I think as we try to look at the data, we're starting from an almost impossible position when if we don't know what we're looking for, is it a radiation signature? Is it something electromagnetic? Is it something like that? Is why this is so challenging and frustrating to me, that we're talking about monitoring something that we don't even know what we're supposed to monitor.
And let me just offer, Josh, before you jump in, the scientific process of hypothesis-driven research, right? Of that, while we don't know all of the possible outcomes in the entire world, we can ask very specific questions and go about it in a very scientific process to understand. So you're right, we don't know exactly what we're looking for, but we know hotspots, as we've seen from both FAA and Aero. We do know some of those conditions that we might be looking for. So if you start with kind of what you know, or places to start to go and look, and you start with the data that we have available to us, we might start being able to untangle the chicken and egg problem.
Jen, what is the phenomena that we're looking for?
So we've heard them from Sean. I would pull up Sean's chart, but I can't quickly do that. Of the criteria that he said on the trends, I use the word criteria, he said trends, of 6 or 7 phenomena, I guess, of specific size or within a specific motion range. And it's something different than what we've seen before, something we don't recognize. And so when you go to look for something that you don't recognize, it can be pretty easy, in that we've fooled ourselves today and even watching some of these videos of what's going on. But when you're able to corroborate that with 3 or 4 other sources, it starts to make sense, right? So something that looks like magic to the naked eye or to that camera and that sensor isn't, once you understand all of the effects of what was going on in the surrounding environment.
So I got a question. Can we, because I got the same frustration you do, right? It's regardless of what you're looking for, if you don't know what it is, whether you're using AI or match filtering techniques, you can't find it, right? You can't find it. So because the question I have is, can we use social media, that kind of thing, as a way of cueing to know where something's happening? Because we know Google searches can lead you to better understand where outbreaks happen, right? Disease outbreaks. Can you use similar type of conflation of data to start saying, well, something's going on here. Let's start cueing sensors in that area. That requires some real-time capability, but is that something we can think about?
Can I object to that just a bit? You can find things that you don't know how they look.
Okay.
There is a lot of the algorithms in anomaly detection are really based on let's find out how what we know looks like, so that anything that doesn't look like that can be identified and spotted, and then we can think whether or not we understand it, right? And so I think the point about the homogeneous detectors really is about that. We need to have a solid understanding of the normal to detect the anomalous or the outliers, as we sometimes perhaps more often call them in science, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to be cautious of time. We were supposed to end this about 10 minutes ago.
Right. So, but this is drifted into discussion, but I think we're doing discussion. So do you have any last topic you want to hit? If not, then we'll just open up to general discussion.
I have 4 more questions that we're technically supposed to answer.
All right. Let's do one.
We can
And
do
then we'll-
4 questions in 2 minutes, right? Okay.
4 and 2 minutes.
Speed round.
Fast.
In considering all of the factors above, what basic physical constraints can be placed on the nature and origins of UAP? Mike, would you like to take this question?
Absolutely. Needle in the haystack.
Okay, got it. I in my notes to answer this, knew that Sean had presented some trends, so I used that kind of as the basis for what basic physical constraints could be available, and also Josh's presentation that he just presented of, we know some of these are still in the realm of understanding. We just haven't applied basic physics to understand what's there, what we have. Question 6, what civilian airspace data related to UAPs have been collected by government agencies and are available for analysis to A, inform efforts to better understand the nature and origins of UAPs, and B, determine the risk of UAPs to the national airspace? So we saw some of this in, I'm going to use examples from today to kind of move quickly. Some of this in Mike Free's presentation, talking about the air risks, right, that FAA is always looking out for. We know by altitude and by sensor and curvature of the earth and line of sight, and as you get higher that you can see more, right? So we have a lot of civilian airspace data that can start to understand the nature and origins of the UAP, and determining the risk is based on how much you know, right? So you think about, I go straight to space and I think about satellites, and one tiny piece of space debris can destroy an entire satellite because they're moving really, really fast in the vacuum of space. It's not necessarily so true in airspace, right? But something that we don't know could have a severe impact on pilots and their flight plan and all of that, which then could really wreak havoc on all of the United States airspace. And so being able to understand and identify what those phenomena are will help de-risk the air flight safety in the national airspace. Question 7. What current reporting protocols and air traffic management data acquisition systems can be modified to acquire additional data on past and future UAPs? We've heard a lot of the reporting structures. It was talked about earlier today. Those probably can be adapted and improved, and it's up to us in discussion as the panel on what those recommendations might be. Question 8, and I'll get off stage. What potential enhancements to the future air traffic management development efforts can be recommended to acquire data concerning future reported UAPs to assist in the effort to better understand the nature and origins of the UAPs? The potential enhancements, automatic filtering of the knowns has come up as a talking point. These are specific really to acquiring data the tuning of those sensor platforms, the multimodal spectrum collection, and being able to kind of timestamp or geostamp each of those to corroborate the sightings. So I will leave the panel with that, with time to continue discussion.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So, sorry. Okay, great. Let me go up to lead this from there. But before I open it up, I just wanted to restate Federica's answer to Mike for hay. If you know the properties of hay very well, and you go through your haystack and say, I don't know what this is, but it doesn't look like hay. You don't need to have a match filter looking for a needle in a haystack if you know hay very well.
And who said NASA couldn't speak to Middle America?
Now, as a New York City resident, my impression is if you go through hay you don't want to do it with your hands. But I defer to you on yeah.
You have no choice, but AINL would be good.
Yeah, I think yeah. So I want to, in the final minutes we have here before the public session, look to the future. I think a lot of us have looked at the data we have now with a sense of dissatisfaction and say, what data would you want and how would you want to collect it? And just think about, we don't need to design the detectors, but think about the characterization that we'd like, what wavelengths we'd like, and just to kind of throw that out as one way to think about what we might want to recommend. Paul.
So one thing that strikes me in that question is that I'm not totally certain that we've dedicated our time and effort to looking for anomalies. I think by default, there are some science communities that look for things like the genesis of a hurricane or a harmful algal bloom in the ocean or, something in interstellar space. But I'm not sure we ever focused our interdisciplinary effort on that. And I think the question you ask is a really interesting one, part of our statement of task, right? But I'm not sure I can answer that quite yet. That's how I feel about that one.
Sure.
Shelley, right. Going along with Dr. Bontempi's point there, we heard a lot from Arrow about specifics about the needle, 1 to 4 meters in size, 0 to Mach 2. You can then look at NASA's assets, right? And look at its spatial resolution, its spectral resolution, in particular, the frame rate I'm going to get to your question here, Dr. Spergel. You can look at the current NASA assets and try to say which ones could find that needle, the ones that Dr. Kirkpatrick put forward. That analysis has not been done. So one of my recommendations would be for NASA to convene a group and a task force to look at its current assets to calculate what current available data, and current facilities could answer insight into that. Now, to get to your future question, looking at this, I see Walter, is frame rate. I see a really big issue with frame rate. So if you want to catch fast moving objects, you need to take quick images. If you want to get to these very small sizes and resolution, depending on altitude, where you're taking your image from ground or space, NASA will likely have to increase its frame rate into its detectors.
I think short answer to what NASA's current
Hola,
asset.
hola, estoy aquí. Buenas.
Haystacks that are
¿Cómo
moving,
estamos?
which I think is the point that you're making. But that doesn't mean that data is not useful, because if it's able to characterize the background extremely well, that gives you a better idea of what unusual looks like. Basically, anything that you do that characterizes the background will contribute to an understanding.
So we're going to have to cut this off now because we're now going to our public comment session. So turn that over.
Van a
Hello, everybody.
cortarlo.
I am Karen Fox with NASA's Office of Communications, and we are segueing into the public Q&A portion of this meeting. As a reminder, this is a FACA meeting, that is a Federal Advisory Committee Act, and so we are under guidance which says that these meetings are public and that we take public questions. We
Van a
got
responder a preguntas
hundreds of
públicas.
questions, and I just wanted to take a moment to
Hay
say thank
cientos de
you to
preguntas.
everybody who submitted them.
Que dicen que
We're
gracias
obviously
a
not
todos
going to
los que
get
han
to all of them
enviado
today, but
preguntas.
we are going to make attempts to answer some of them online. You can always check back to science.nasa.gov/UAP, where over time we will make it clear where we're putting out some more of those answers. In the meantime, we did have to make some decisions. We stuck to questions that applied to this independent study and UAPs. There were a lot of questions about astrobiology and other subjects that we're not going to get to today. And also in an attempt to get to as many of the questions as possible, since so many of them were similar, we've sort of bucketed them. And that is how we're going to try to address as many as possible. So I'm going to toss the questions to you, and we'll look to getting some answers for our public questions. All right.
Preguntas públicas.
So
Okay.
first set of questions are specifically about the data being used. So examples. What exactly are you incorporating into your report? What data are we using? What are some examples of data being used? Do we have multi-sensor data or of objects performing maneuvers that seem truly anomalous? Do we have photos, videos? What about having the NASA historian go through the NASA's historical records? Did you interview military or pilots for this study? So looking for some information about the kinds of data.
¿Qué tipo de información tienen? La gente pregunta. ¿Y se han entrevistado a
David looks
pilotos?
like he's jumping in.
Well, I think first and foremost, our goal here is really to create a roadmap, right? So really, we have been informed by some of the events that are reported, and we've had, but we've certainly not done a complete historical study or in an archive. And I think one of the things we've wanted to do was learn what kinds of events have been reported, learn about some of the ones that have been resolved, some of the ones that are unresolved, so we can best think about how in the future we can collect data so that we can get more robust answers.
La pregunta mejor sería cómo podemos en el futuro recopilar datos.
It does.
Others have anything else they'd like to add?
¿Alguien tiene algo más que decir?
All right. Then I will keep going.
Pues continuamos. Nadie más.
Another big question category was about transparency and about sharing information. And so examples in this category are, what is NASA hiding and where are you hiding it? How much has been shared publicly? Has NASA ever cut the live NASA TV feed away from something? Has NASA released all UAP evidence it has ever received? What about NASA astronauts? Do they have an NDA or clearance that does not allow them to speak about UAP sightings? What are the science overlords hiding? Dan Evans.
All right, I'll take a stab at that one. I really want to assure the public and to double down on some remarks I made this morning that this agency is absolutely cast iron committed to openness and transparency and honesty.
La apertura y la transparencia
and that commitment also extends to our live NASA TV feeds. They provide real-time footage from our various missions. Now, to my knowledge, NASA has never intentionally cut a live feed to hide anything, and that includes
Nunca ha querido
UAPs,
esconder nada aposta, la NASA.
Sometimes there are interruptions to our feeds, but that is simply because space is a complex place. There's a vast array of natural phenomena, human-made objects, and so forth. But again, I wanted to reassure the public that we're absolutely committed to providing the public transparency and openness. Those are the hallmarks of NASA. That's why we're here today in public on TV, because we want the
Por eso hacemos
public
este
to
evento
have the
público en la
opportunity
televisión.
to see the process of this committee
para ver el
doing its
proceso.
work in public. It's only right.
Just to follow up on what I said, I didn't mean to joke about it, but in my 20 years at NASA, no one,
En 20 años
either
en la
officially or unofficially, in my recollection, have ever discussed or briefed us or had any kind of discussions about anything that would be considered a UAP or UFO or anything like that.
And I'll ask you to stand for
Que
1 second
nadie
and
ha
state your name.
ocultado nada
I'll
en
ask you
sus
to
20
stand for 1
años de
second and
carrera en
state
la
your
NASA.
name, just so everybody know who was speaking. It's hard to see in the
Scott
back.
Kelly. I'm just following up on the question about if NASA astronauts ever signed an NDA or anything of that, anything like that. In my experience of being in the astronaut
NDA es un
office for
acuerdo de
20 years, there
confidencialidad.
was never any formal
Nunca.
or informal discussions at all about UAPs or UFOs or
Nunca ha habido ninguna
anyone
discusión sobre los ovnis.
reporting anything that would suggest something from
Nadie ha
beyond our
reportado algo que
planet.
tengamos que ocultar en 20
Thank you very
años que lleva
much.
este hombre en la NASA.
Yes, please.
Just want to make a quick comment about the culture of science in relation to this question. Scientists by nature are at least intellectually sort of rebellious. It's in our nature to question authority. You know, that's how you're a good scientist. You don't just take someone's word for it. You try to discover the truth. And for that reason, you know, this question about what are the science overlords hiding, that's sort of written in a facetious way. But I just want to emphasize that there's no way that all scientists could be in on trying to hide something, because it's just not in our nature. If somebody told me to try to hide something as a scientist, that would just increase my desire to belay that order and to release it. And I think that's true of our community in general.
All right, thank you so much. I am going to go on to our third set of questions, which
Más
is,
preguntas.
has NASA been tracking Earth's atmosphere, or are we also studying bodies of water for UAP? And I think that's a Dan question.
Que si solamente
for
están en la
NASA,
atmósfera
or-
o también en el agua,
Oh.
en los
Yep.
UAP.
Here's the oceanographer. You know, my understanding is this is a completely independent study to assess, you know, what assets, what data, what science, what observations, platforms NASA has to potentially help evaluate and understand UAP, right? We have, NASA has an Earth Science division and many scientists at many centers and many academics and other partners out there that study the Earth as a system. We do this from the unique vantage point of space, and the atmosphere is part of that. I think Dr. Kirkpatrick stated this morning that to his knowledge, and I think to ours, there isn't anything that's been reported below the ocean surface. You know, and so I think part of what we've been talking about all day is, you know, what assets are out there to actually begin to identify data that could be useful in explaining any of these reports if and should they come in. So I think that's probably
Ni idea de lo
it,
que ha
unless
dicho,
there's something
la
else to
verdad.
add. All right, then. Thank you. Moving on to our fourth general bucket of questions. What are you doing
No ha
to solve
respondido.
the stigmatization surrounding the study of UAP?
I can take that one.
And state your name if you wouldn't mind first.
Carlin Toner, FAA. I think the fact that NASA has called us together here as a panel to look into this, that NASA is hosting a public meeting, that we've heard, right, it clearly stated, we're here to be transparent. I think that's the first step in trying to really normalize the study of UAPs. And
El objetivo principal de todo esto es normalizar el estudio de los
about how to
UAP.
make it credible. And we talked also about UAP in one of the earlier talks this morning of the definition of the A, whether it was aerial or anomalous, as the legislation now is, and really the distinction beyond UFOs, right? When we're looking at UAPs here, we're beyond just airplanes. We're looking at all types of anomalous phenomena. And so that's just a more inclusive term there.
Yeah, still Mike Gold. Just wanted to emphasize what Carlin said, which is so accurate. I really consider it quite amazing that we're here having this discussion. NASA leadership
Que
deserves great
es
kudos
impresionante que
for this.
estemos aquí teniendo esta
And
discusión
beyond, I
sobre
think a
los ovnis.
recommendation that I'd like to make is that NASA participate in symposia, in panels, sponsor research. When you have the NASA
que
logo
tiene que haber más
on that
búsquedas y
sponsored
más
research, on
actividades
the
como esta,
discussion, it really helps normalize and push back against the stigma.
normalizar.
I think NASA can leverage its excellent reputation,
Esa es una
both
de
domestically and
las
abroad,
consignas de
to help
esta
push back on that stigma. I think it's important to do so not just for science and discovery,
normalizar.
but for national
Una de las
security.
consignas de
That
esta,
we've all
de
seen what's occurred with
esta
balloons
actividad.
from rival nations. We don't want this stigma to be a vulnerability that rival nations can take advantage of.
Yes, Dan.
A las 9, os repito,
Thanks, Karen. Just a few
a una rueda
additional
de prensa
points
para decir un poco
from
sus
the agency perspective.
consecuencias, sus
We are, of course,
conclusiones, etc.
taking a set of actions to effectively normalize the study of UAPs, and that involves collaborating across the government, encouraging an open
si lo
dialogue,
importante es
and
eso,
promoting
estamos
rigorous
apañados, pero bueno.
scientific inquiry. Let me turn to each of those in turn. So in terms of promoting a rigorous scientific inquiry, the primary way we're doing this is by being truly rigorous and employing an evidence-based methodology
Ahora
in
mismo en
everything
España
that we do.
empieza a ser
That
trending
is
topic NASA.
characteristic of scientific research. It's no accident that the people up on this stage are true experts in their respective fields. Okay, so that is in turn going to help us to legitimize UAP studies. Encouraging open dialogue. So by holding public meetings such as this one
Está comentando
and
mucha gente
having
aquí.
open conversations about findings, then we're helping to normalize discussions again. And that really goes arm in arm with our commitment to openness and transparency with the public. And then finally, in terms of collaborating across the government, we're working very closely with other government agencies, not least Sean's office, Aero, to broaden the scope and the depth of our study. And I honestly believe that this collective interagency approach will lend credibility to the study of UAPs, and it's going to demonstrate the seriousness with which we're approaching this issue. Thanks.
Well, that segues very nicely into what our next set of questions are, which is who we are working with. So the question is, who else is NASA currently working with, or do we want to work with to study UAP? And is NASA working with international partners?
José Guijarro dice, si dicen que los UAP son observados a la altitud de los vuelos civiles o militares, es decir, atmosféricos, ¿por qué tiene que investigarlo la NASA? No es un caso de una agencia espacial.
To this panel so kindly asked us, both in what other government agencies are collecting data, what data is available. NASA is partnering with them in many ways, as well as NASA has a wide commercial outreach and partnerships with understanding what data is available, as well as NASA's founded on well, not founded, but the core principles of NASA are with international partners. So the information that our partners are gathering is typically available to NASA as well. So yes, on all accounts.
And I may just emphasize and add that NASA is singular, I believe, among government agencies in this international outreach. Again, not to keep talking about the Artemis Accords, but you see countries like Saudi Arabia that we may not have a great relationship with as government right now. We have Saudi Arabia and Israel in the Accords family, so that NASA is unique in its scope and ability to reach out. I also think that we're entering a new era of commercial space transportation that is going from low Earth orbit out to cislunar space. And that is going to be the purview of the Department of Commerce, which is taking over space traffic management. So I think it's very important that NASA work with and support commerce as we go through that transition. Department of Defense is currently responsible for that. And I think that will help us not only to identify potential UAPs, but to assist in preventing contention, congestion, and eventually conflict. And I also want to note, in terms of space debris in orbit right now, I believe, represents an existential threat to our very society, that we are getting very close to an event that could cause real problems for our ability to access satellites. And that's why I think there's great ancillary benefits to the conversation we're having today, that as we increase our capability to monitor orbit for UAPs, that data could also be very relevant as we look at near-Earth objects and other threats. And again, to just end on near-Earth objects, Apophis, for example, an asteroid, is going to come so close to Earth, it will be below geosynchronous satellites. So any effort to begin to catalog and do better in terms of understanding that environment is going to be terrific, and I hope NASA works with commerce and international agencies on Apophis and other missions.
I think Federica had something to say too.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, a lot of the things that we think we might recommend in terms of platforms to collect data that would be useful to study UAPs, we recommend a multi-platform and multi-site. That would also mean likely ground-based as well as space-based facilities. And this is being done already in astrophysics, co-observing the sky from the ground and from space with different methodologies and different instruments to get a more comprehensive picture of what's normal and then detect what's anomalous. And about every 10 years, the astrophysics community anyways, but many other branches, convene a panel of experts to see what things can be done to advance the field in the next decade. It's called the decadal survey for us. And one of the recommendations this year was explicitly for agencies that do astrophysics to work together. So NSF, DOE, and NASA to work together, share data, share facilities and instruments. So I think this is, there's a lot of fields will benefit from this, including the UAP studies.
Oh, absolutely.
Carlin Toner, I'd like to put an exclamation point on how well NASA is collaborating across the government. I'm from the FAA, and I can personally attest that FAA and NASA have a robust engagement in transferring research into practice in the ATM system. I think on the commercial space side, we work well with NASA. And all of our agencies are in the whole of government approach, supporting Aero specifically on the UAP topic. And it really comes down to good government and how we deliver, because we can each work our own mission space, but to cover the whole space, we need to collaborate together.
And Dan?
To put an exclamation point on Carlin's exclamation point. So I think it's important to say that we really do have a good relationship with the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, AERO, Sean's office, and its previous or predecessor organization, the UAP Task Force. And we have really benefited from very fruitful collaborations among those various entities. And quite frankly, as a taxpayer, one should expect nothing less than the government to be working effectively across different units together. It's only right. That being said, it's also important to acknowledge what NASA's perspective is in this study, and to acknowledge that the Department of Defense, the intelligence community have massively different equities about the study of UAP, and they have different interests. Ours is a purely scientific one. So we collaborate, we consult. It's a very good relationship. And I agree wholeheartedly with Carlin that a whole of government approach is absolutely the right one to take.
Great, thank you. I will move on to our sixth bucket of questions, which we had many on this topic. Is there evidence that UAP were created from non-human intelligence?
¿Hay evidencias de que los UAP fueron creados por inteligencias no humanas? Aquí es donde la matan.
First and foremost, we are scientists. And we follow the scientific process.
Somos científicos.
And I
Seguimos el
hope
método
that
científico.
The gathering here today showed a little bit of a glimpse on how the scientific process works. It's not a question that you can answer very quickly with yes or no.
No es una pregunta que
We
puedas
follow the data,
responder
right?
fácil con sí o no.
As scientists, we follow the data, we formulate hypotheses, we test theories, we follow the scientific
Saludos, Isa,
process.
y manda un
The role of this panel
esa parte
has been to create
a
a
José Manuel Nieves,
roadmap and a framework
que
for
espero que
how
esté mejor
all
y que me
scientists
hubiera
that are
encantado que estuviera aquí
interested in
conmigo
this
comentando
phenomenon
estas cosas.
Can
O en su
further
canal, claro.
study, can further collect data, can further formulate experiments,
No
get
van a decir-
hypotheses, can test different methods, maybe even
No van a
innovate on the
decir
methodology
nada de
side
nada,
of things,
no van a decir
come up with new
nada.
methods for how we can do basically science, but not just any kind of science, but the science of discovery and exploration, which is basically in the spirit of NASA. So just like Carl Sagan was saying, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
Pero
We cannot
como
make
decía
that
Carl
kind of
Sagan,
extraordinary claims
declaraciones
at all for
extraordinarias necesitan
any
pruebas
kind of big
extraordinarias.
subjects in science, whether it's
Y no las
UAPs,
no las tienen.
whether it's
No tienen pruebas de
biosignatures,
que
whether
sea
it's
extraterrestre.
technosignatures. This question of whether we are alone in the universe is probably one of the largest questions that we've had
Una de las
in our
preguntas más grandes
history of
del
science, in our
mundo
history
es
of
si estamos solos en
humanity.
el universo.
And it's not one that we can take lightly. And that's why we
Y
need
no es una
so
pregunta que
many
podamos tomarnos
scientists and multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary teams to
a la
work
torera,
together,
¿no?
and many organizations. So it's a process, it's a roadmap, and we work collectively on this. And
Estamos
we hope that within our
recopilando
lifetime
datos
we will
para
be
poder
able to
responder a
answer
esa
this big
pregunta, pero ahora
question
mismo
of
no
whether we
podemos.
are alone or not, and also to better characterize this phenomenon, which is UAPs.
I want to sort of supplement that excellent answer by noting that we have not seen the extraordinary evidence, right? I mean, it's
No
in a sense
estamos
to give,
encontrando
to
evidencias
make the
extraordinarias.
claim that we see something that is evidence of, non-human intelligence would be
No quieren decir
require extraordinary
extraterrestre,
evidence.
dicen inteligencias
And
no
we have not seen that.
humanas. No, de mi prima, no te digo.
Important to make clear.
All right,
Que no
then
tienen
I will move on
pruebas
to
que sea
our
extraterrestre. Vale.
seventh set of questions. We received many questions
bien.
about the budget that is being dedicated to this. How large of a budget will NASA allocate? How large of a budget is NASA allocating? And how large of a budget will NASA allocate towards the study of UAPs? Dan?
Yeah, that's a Dan question. So there are two separate questions in there, which is what is the budget for this group, this team, and what is the budget going forward? I think. Now, the budget for this independent study team is very consistent with any other of our external review groups that we bring into the Science Mission Directorate on an annual basis. So, we have maybe 100, 200 such groups, entirely consistent with that. Also important to say going forward now that NASA has not established a program relative to UAP. And as a result, there's no associated programmatic funding. But this is how NASA works. Federal budgeting is a complex journey, of course. And the way NASA, particularly NASA science, likes to work is we anticipate and wait recommendations from independent groups such as this one. And we need to wait on final recommendations and then we'll make an assessment. So too early to say. But of course, that's all couched in the fact that federal budgeting is a very complex process and we will always follow the law.
All right. We're making good time. We have one more question that encompassed many of the ones we got, which is, has NASA encountered any aliens or extraterrestrial life? What happens if the public comes across extraterrestrial life? What would NASA do if extraterrestrial life was discovered? What would NASA study or do if extraterrestrial life was discovered? Now, I think it's worth making a distinction that when we talk about extraterrestrial life, we do have a study within NASA of astrobiology, which is not intelligent life necessarily. And so I invite you, as you answer this question,
Que
to
no
make
necesariamente
clear
la
the
vida extraterrestre
distinctions
tiene que
as you were
ser
talking
inteligente, dice la
in
chica.
terms of
Y la NASA tiene estudios
UAPs as well as any astrobiology work.
exobiológicos.
I would
no sé
start
cómo
by saying
llamarlo
one
eso.
of NASA's big questions.
Siempre responde el calvo del
is there
bigote.
life
Qué
out
pesado.
Right. And a lot
perilla.
of what NASA's doing
Ese.
in its exploration of the solar system and
Deja
beyond
hablar a los demás.
is
Que los
focused
tiene escogidos
on
por...
searching for life in any form, extraterrestrial life. I think one of the things we have learned in the past 20 years is planets are common. We knew, of course, about the planets in our solar system, but we now know there are lots of planets out there. So there are lots of potential environments for life. And I think
sí que tienen
one of the most fascinating
lugares
questions
potencialmente
is, do any of those planets host
preparados
life?
para la vida.
And that's
en el
something that
cosmos.
NASA is trying to
Pero no han
address
encontrado la
in
vida.
a host of
¿Qué
different
pregunta?
places.
¿Qué van a decir? No van a decir,
Whether
pues ahora que lo
it's
dices,
probes,
sí,
that
hemos
are
encontrado
landing
evidencias de
on
vida, por
planets
ejemplo en
or
Marte.
designing
Sí, ay, se
missions
me había olvidado
that will
decirlo.
look for
Es
signatures
que
of life around
también
other planets. So the search for life is a really important theme. We haven't found life beyond Earth yet, right? I mean, let's be clear about this. We haven't found it yet, but we're looking. and we're looking for it in lots of different ways. And, you know, David was discussing technosignatures as one way that we can look both within our solar system and beyond. And there's a lot of different elements, I think, of this potential search. And, you know, just to go back to something that was phrased in an earlier question, you know, is NASA hiding anything about this?
¿La NASA esconde algo?
This is
No.
actually what, you know, answering this question is
Dice
one of
él.
the things that NASA as an agency is excited about. It's something that lots of scientists working with NASA are excited about is this question of, is there life out there? You know, and I think one of the things that makes this question of are we alone such a central question, not just to the scientific community, it's a central question, I think, for the public. I suspect there are more people watching this than the typical episode of NASA TV, right? And this is something where we will have, you know, media coming to the press
No va a
conference
decir ni pío este.
because these questions touch on something that I think is really a deep question for humanity is, are we alone in the universe?
Yeah, just to kind of echo what David said a bit. I mean, obviously, this is something we think a lot about in astrobiology. What if we succeed?
Astrobiología.
And
Astrobiología.
you know, we are very driven to try to find real evidence of extraterrestrial life, and we would be highly driven to share that if we found it. Because everyone wants to show that they've been able to succeed in what they're trying to do. And you know, one perhaps illustrative example is to think about what happened when we came close, when NASA thought maybe they had discovered extraterrestrial life. And a big event actually in the history of astrobiology was in the 1990s when some scientists had thought that they had discovered fossils in a meteorite that came from Mars. And what happens is you don't announce it immediately. You make sure that you try to make sure you're right, because you don't want to have false alarms and announce something
Que si
where
dices
then
que
you
en
go, oops,
Marte
sorry, we were
hay-
wrong. That was a mistaken analysis. But what happened was when the scientists were sure they were right, then there was a big, in fact, presidential press conference with President Clinton and NASA, and it was a big public announcement. And that's what would happen. If we discovered something, we would try to make sure we were right, and then we would very proudly and loudly let the public know.
Ahora viene Israel, que está...
Thanks. We have just 1 minute left, so I'll let you finish up.
Yeah, thank you. The only thing I wanted to add, I wouldn't at all liken it to
Hola, ¿qué tal?
alien or extraterrestrial
Hola,
life,
uy, qué
but
susto.
in astrobiology and exobiology, you know, there is the exploration of our planet
Están
as
haciendo
an
ahora preguntas
analog for what might be
de la
found
gente.
on other worlds.
algunos
You know,
periodistas y
and
eso.
what is extreme cold, what is
Están
extreme
preguntando si han
heat,
encontrado vida extraterrestre. Digo yo, sí, te van a decir,
black
anda,
smoke,
pues gracias por preguntarlo. Sí, 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 hemos encontrado. Nos había
Mira,
contarlo.
tenemos uno aquí.
Sí, sí, mira, pasa Paul.
Hola. Hola Jordi, que me saluda por ahí.
Sí, sí, sí. Es tremendo esto. La pregunta también se las trae. Somos un poquito... Yo estoy editando el programa de Mario Misterioso, las cosas como son.
Así no sé. Así tal cual.
Porque es que si no, no me va a dar tiempo, no me va a dar la vida.
Was could our own Earth's ocean be used and the life within it as an analog for what might be discovered elsewhere? So I think that's an example of a potential synergy of interdisciplinary science, research, observations, etc. Collection of data and information gathering.
¿Cuánto queda para el
No, queda media hora todavía.
el comunicado? Comunicado es a las 9.
Sí, pero si no puedes tú, lo emito yo, o si no, ya paramos a las 9. No lo sé.
No, lo hacemos. Sí,
porque
ha venido.
Esto está denso.
So let me also just answer the one other
Calvo,
question.
nada más que habla él. Me
What do
cago en la
you do if
leche.
you see something surprising?
Joder.
Right, where do you report? And
Pues
this
es el único que ha
come
dicho algo
back to
interesante.
something I mentioned in my opening
Pero ese era,
remarks.
este es
The
el...
AARO is the-
Tío, es el malo de
our lead
Flash, ¿no?
agency for
De Flash
UAPs.
Gordon, digo.
And while we've talked about
O de Superman,
life in
Luthor.
this context,
Sí. Pero vamos, que es un malo. Decía María de Star Trek, pues también me vale.
Sí, pero es muy de Flash Gordon, sí que es verdad.
Sí, 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 sí.
We saw this with some of the balloons or commercial jets. We saw those examples.
Que tiene, por cierto, una parte de la barba más afeitada que la otra. La parte,
porque perdió una apuesta.
La parte derecha. ¿No te das cuenta?
Perdió una apuesta del fútbol. Como gane.
O sea, puede ser que estemos retransmitiendo el evento más
No, no.
denso.
Sí, sí. Encima, a ver, lo hemos hecho mal en el sentido de que
nos hemos ido.
Pirado, o sea que
pero tampoco
nos
hubiéramos
hemos
ganado
pirado.
mucho, la verdad.
No, mira, te puedo decir cosas que hay aquí. Sin rastros de vida alienígena. No tenemos ninguna evidencia concluyente sobre el origen extraterrestre de estos fenómenos. Aún así, necesitamos recopilar más datos y revisarlos. Nadia Drake, una de las científicas que integra este panel de expertos, argumenta que el futuro informe sobre el estudio de los ovnis se centrará sobre todo en los fenómenos que ocurren en la atmósfera y no relativos al espacio, porque es aquí donde ocurren la mayoría de avistamientos. Eso es verdad, lo decía el gráfico.
NASA can help remove the stigma. NASA can draw more of the scientific community.
A ver, para entenderlo un
Están con el
poquito,
estigma que no cagan.
para que lo entienda quien lo está viendo también. O sea, de estas conversaciones se va a establecer un resumen que van a explicar a las 9. ¿Esto es correcto? ¿O esto es como una especie de debate posterior al informe que van a resumir ahora?
A ver, creo que va a haber un informe futuro que no va hoy, pero sí que por lo visto hoy van a comentar algunas cosas a las sumen, yo creo, en plan, bueno, pues entonces ¿qué? Pues esto y esto.
Bueno. Esta tarde hemos tenido un poquito de suerte, porque gracias a Jordi nos ha pasado un enlace y hemos tenido la mitad más o menos en castellano comprensible.
¿Ah, sí?
Lo estaba dando Telemundo. Que es esa.
Anda, ¿y ya no?
Ya no. Ya lo he mirado yo ahora.
¿Y estaba con traducción simultánea o qué?
Sí, totalmente.
Oh, cómo mola.
Estaba muy bien.
Ah,
Sí,
pero
sí.
gracias, Jordi. Jordi ha estado ahí sin parar, yo no sé.
Ha estado
Jordi,
sin parar,
te van a
hombre,
echar la bronca
sí.
en casa.
Jordi, para él esto dice que le gusta mucho estos
No,
temas.
sí, lo
y
sé, si no, no estaría. Pero que no ha parado, nuestro amigo.
Sí, sí.
A ver, compresor y ahora amplificar. Claro, sí, es que...
comparte pantalla.
Ahora voy a
y-
planchar también. Lo
lo
pongo
vemos.
aquí.
Pues yo estaba viendo esto mientras hacía la cena y esas cosas.
Claro.
He hecho un puré para la niña, otra cosa.
Sí, pero vamos, que no te has enterado de nada, reconócelo.
Es lo mismo, sí, pero los he tenido de fondo. Di que
Eso
si alguna
sí.
palabra suelta, sí. ¿Cuándo?
Sí.
Sí.
A ver.
Pero tengo la sensación de que hay gente ahí que no ha hablado, ¿no?
Yo no he estado todo el rato. No,
No, no,
Pero
yo he
habrá
estado-
gente los de atrás son más tímidos.
Los de atrás no han hablado. O sea, son los típicos
Algunos
que
sí,
salen en los
pero
meetings,
hay una
que es
debe
para
ser
acompañar.
española.
Sí, que
Porque
se
tiene como
llama
acentillo.
Ana María o no sé qué.
Tiene como acentillo como si lo cuento yo. Bueno,
Sí, han
mejor
dicho
que
el
si lo
nombre
cuento
antes,
yo.
¿eh? Yo no sé si
Ah,
era
pues
Ana María, creo que era.
Ana María Aldón.
¿Han dicho?
Bueno, pues esto ya estaría. Vamos a exportarlo. Ah, no, me falta un audio. Joder.
Yo porque no, porque el ordenador me reventará si edito algo. ¿No? Ya me pondría a editar cosas también. Pero bueno, a preparar nuestro
Increíble.
próximo
Oye,
programa.
vamos a hacer nuestra reunión ahora que tenemos 4 personas viéndonos. ¿De qué va el próximo programa? Cuenta.
Próximo programa, te puedo. Mira, no te lo quiero decir
Dame
todo.
alguna
voy a
pista.
hacer-
No, dame alguna pista solo.
Pues, vamos, ¿cómo te explico esto? Como esta semana ha sido la semana del exterior, de mirar hacia afuera de nuestro planeta, en el próximo
Ajá.
programa vamos a mirar hacia adentro.
Oh, ya me has dado una buena pista, ¿eh? Si lo he
a lo
entendido
mejor,
bien.
a lo mejor, sí. Vamos a mirar hacia
Yo
adentro.
entiendo tierra hueca.
Eso les va a
pero-
encantar a la gente. ya verás. Algo brutal. Y con una cosa que estoy preparando que me está costando la vida, pero como nos salga va a ser.
De eso que luego yo no lo sé leer y me enfado. Ay, ¿qué
No,
pasa? Que
exacto,
todo está bien.
exacto. De eso. Bueno, esto sí.
Va a ser de
bueno,
esas, ¿no?
De esas, sí. Y-
A ver.
Dios mío. Bueno, yo os voy a decir que va a haber una especie de recreación a nuestra manera de un programa mítico. Y hasta aquí
Oy,
pone.
oy, oy, oy.
no puedo decir nada.
Saludos cordiales, bienvenidos.
Sería
José
guay.
María García.
Que por cierto, hay una nueva serie en Movistar Plus.
Sí, hay tema con eso, ¿eh?
De Super García. Es que a mí es uno de mis popes de la comunicación, ¿eh? O sea, a mí me diré lo que sea
Es un gran comunicador.
Será el tío un borde, será el tío lo que sea, pero yo me acuerdo de tener 10 años, 11 años, de verdad, escucharlo con una radio que me regalaron para la comunión y lo escuchaba en la cama. Era alucinante, o sea, cómo conseguía el tío que te quedaras toda la hora entera sin decirte nada, porque al final nunca pasaba nada, o casi nunca pasaba
Eso
algo.
es un estilo que luego se ha copiado mucho.
Una barbaridad, ¿sabes? Te lo envolvía de tal manera que tú te quedabas, como en plan, todas las noches parecía que se iba a liar, y se liaba alguna de muchas. Pero bueno,
Qué bueno.
espectacular. Aquí estamos hablando de José María García, mientras vemos a un señor.
Pero ya, señor, súbemelo un poco porque yo no me estoy enterando
vale.
de nada.
Vale, te lo he bajado para.
Ah, vale, no, sí, para dar al palique. Ellos llevan desde las 10 hasta las 3. Que yo no sé, luego a partir de las 9 cuánto se alargará. Ya pondremos una hora nosotros. Pondremos una hora límite. Es decir,
no, pero tú crees que esta gente yo creo que después hace un comunicado de media hora y se van, ¿no? Digo yo. Me imagino. Llevan todo el día ahí, también, ¿eh?
Sí, por eso te digo.
O sea, si esto ha sido raro, más raro ha sido estar ahí sentado.
Sí, bueno, han dicho hace poquito, Isra, que eso, que no tienen pruebas de que haya vida extraterrestre ni de que los ovnis que ellos han visto o han registrado sean de origen extraterrestre, que no lo tienen.
Pero la cuestión es, o sea, yo me niego a pensar que esto no tenga un objetivo. O sea, es decir, ¿esto para qué vale?
A ver, vamos a resumir un poco.
Venga.
Ellos saben que existen cosas o fenómenos en los cielos que la gente está viendo, que están registrando con sus sensores, que tienen un patrón porque aparecen muy cerca de zonas costeras, aparecen en zonas de conflicto o zonas sensibles, aparecen en la atmósfera, tienen colores. O sea, hay conclusiones, pero no saben lo que es. Y la reunión de hoy no es para decir qué pueden ser los UAP, es para invitar a que desde aquí se empiece a
investigar.
Se reempiece, porque siempre están con lo mismo. Se empiece a investigar otra vez el tema, se pongan en serio, quiten el estigma ese que hay incluso dentro de la comunidad científica y se pongan manos a la obra. Eso es básicamente.
Yo creo básicamente, y tengo la sensación, después de haberme comido así, aunque sea de fondo todo el rato, toda la conferencia esta, o como se llame, o el debate, o la charla, tengo la sensación que básicamente lo que están haciendo esta gente es, ahora que más o menos tenemos claro, o parece que tienen claro, que la procedencia de estos cacharros es básicamente una procedencia militar, porque es lo que en algunos momentos ha parecido ser, ahora que tenemos claro, ahora sí que nos interesa que la gente pueda investigar, porque esto es un tema, ¿no? ¿Tú no crees que viene por aquí?
No sé.
Claro, porque es que claro, que nos están. Uy.
¿Qué pasa?
Se ha quedado parado.
Uy. Ah, vale, que ahora vuelven.
Ahora publicidad.
Se van a echar un cigar. Y ahora vuelven.
Bueno, pues lo que te estaba diciendo.
Quita el sonido entonces ahora, para que podamos hablar.
Vale, espera, sí, lo quito yo también, que si no yo me vuelvo loco. Que yo lo escucho siempre. Ahora sí. Vale.
Bueno, en fin,
Pilarín.
Sí, bueno. Sigue, que estabas comentando algo interesante.
No,
que ahora que saben que son militares, o que creen que pueden ser militares.
Vale, más que eso, yo tengo la sensación, yo desde mi perspectiva, que es la que tengo, que no es otra, a lo mejor tengo una perspectiva más
Tú
corta.
Los ovnis te cuesta mucho creer que sean extraterrestres.
Que mucha gente... No, yo creo que hay de todo. Yo creo que debe haber de todo. Es decir, lo que no
eso es interesante. ¿Y si nos estamos liando y hay de todo? Hay naves
Claro.
de otros planetas
Es
o
que creo
sondas de
que-
otros planetas,
yo es que
pero a
creo
la
que
vez
puede haber de
hay
todo.
tecnología militar avanzada.
Claro, es que si yo veo volando algo en los cielos, yo no te puedo decir de dónde viene. Es decir, puede ser cualquier cosa. Entonces, claro,
Claro.
en este punto, en este punto entendemos que esta parte, la parte alienígena o la tesis alienígena a la NASA es verdad. Nunca le ha interesado ni le interesa. Esto es así,
No.
no interesa.
Bueno, a ver,
Pero,
oficialmente te van a decir que sí porque el desarrollo de la ciencia,
bueno,
ellos lo que quieren es responder a la gran pregunta
sí, estamos solos.
de si estamos solos, etcétera.
Pero la cuestión, yo creo que la cuestión es mucho más seria. La cuestión, y si no ya me lo dirás de aquí a un tiempo, la cuestión es que están dando alas a otro tipo de cosas. Es decir, vale, vamos a investigar porque políticamente, vamos a investigar porque estratégicamente nos interesa. Y a ver cuánto tardamos a raíz de esto. Le doy 5 meses. ¿Cuánto tardamos en sacar pues el típico globo chino otra vez y decir, bueno, como nos hemos puesto todos a investigar, ya sabemos que esta nave o esta tal cosa es de origen chino o es de origen ruso o es de origen tal? Y yo creo que básicamente es eso. Es una estrategia como decir, no, sí, no lo hacemos, no lo hacemos por molestar. Lo hacemos por investigar, ya claro. Y de pasada, la NASA pues tiene otra forma, tiene, digamos, otra función que no tenía. ¿Vale? Y eso, en los momentos que estamos, con esta inflación a nivel mundial que estamos pasando muy, muy bestia, el que la NASA tenga nuevos motivos para existir, porque hay que esto todo el mundo
Eso es
sabe.
interesante también. Sí.
Claro.
Como para abrir otra.
Otro melón nuevo. Claro, tú imagínate.
Aquello de no pongas todos los huevos en la misma cesta, ¿no?
Es que se lleva, Álvaro, ahora el porcentaje no lo tengo aquí, pero se lleva una parte enorme
de
presupuesto de Estados Unidos. Es absolutamente
no, pero
brutal.
porque para Estados Unidos la agencia de la NASA es militar y por tanto es importante.
Claro, porque en ningún momento a mí
investigar.
lo que me molesta
Es
un
I más
poco
D.
es lo que me molesta, y sí que creo en el fenómeno ovni como el fenómeno extraterrestre, sí creo en ello. O sea, porque creo que no es que tiene, o sea, hay tantos casos, tantísimos, y casos además de humanoides y casos muy raros que es imposible, o sea, por la misma regla de tres, que es imposible que todo sea en verdad, es imposible que todo sea mentira. Entonces, en ese caso, yo creo que lo que sí que están haciendo es posicionarse, están desmintiendo totalmente el tema extraterrestre, o por lo menos diciendo que a ellos no les consta,
sí,
pero también están dejando fuera las oleadas ovni bestias de los 80, de principio de los 90.
Y los casos,
Claro, todos esos se los han saltado, porque te hacen una recogida de datos del 96 para adelante. Eso también es algo bastante curioso. Luego sí que ha habido algunas cosas que me han gustado mucho, que he escuchado.
Ahora
que he
mismo
escuchado.
NASA es trending topic, ahora mismo.
Sí. Por ejemplo, lo de que pueden aprovechar este tipo de naves, ¿cómo era la parte no visible de la luz? O sea, eso es algo que me ha girado la cabeza. Eso se ha comentado esta tarde. Se ha hablado del camuflaje óptico, ¿vale? Se ha hablado
muy interesante, claro.
Y se ha hablado de cómo lo usarían, que ellos tienen constancia de que, digamos, pues que, bueno, pues que de alguna manera esos objetos consiguen reflejar o consiguen huir de esa luz para que sean completamente invisibles a muchas cosas. Y bueno, la verdad es que es interesante, pero ¿por qué digo que van hacia el tema militar? Pues muy sencillo, porque el objeto que nos han mostrado, que hemos visto esta tarde, era un objeto en plena zona de guerra.
Sí.
Claro, pues el que nos han mostrado era un objeto en zona de guerra. Es como decir, bueno, no, sí que hay de estas cosas, pero estas las encontramos básicamente cuando hay conflicto. No lo sé. Yo es que no sé qué es lo que debe pensar la gente. Si aún están, ¿no? Con los anuncios y esas historias.
Sí.
No sé, ¿tú cómo lo ves? ¿Tú qué crees?
Yo te cuento también cosas que estoy viendo que también está tuiteando así, pues
sí,
José Antonio Caravaca. Al final Guijarro lo podíamos haber llamado, porque aunque esté en Egipto, no puede perderse esto. Hace poco era trending topic NASA, pero me parece a mí que ya no nos interesa. Pero ha sido esta tarde trending topic la palabra NASA. Ahora mismo, no. Ahora mismo empieza a ser trending topic Miura 1. Bueno, pero he leído por ahí. A ver, bueno, aparte de lo que he leído, te cuento yo también mi opinión. Estamos en un momento en el que hay un interés. ¿Por qué ahora? Habría que preguntarnos, pero hay un interés. Quiero pensar que de la sana curiosidad científica, un interés de estudiar un fenómeno que se les escapa. Y a la ciencia no puede ser que se les escape. Y fíjate, en el espacio, y si hablamos de la física cuántica, se escapan muchas cosas. Pero a un científico la duda pues le corroe y necesita saber. Y como un científico necesita saber, pues han descubierto que hay una serie de fenómenos que han preferido darles un nombre aparte, porque esos fenómenos no identificados en los cielos, y además quitarle la palabra objeto, pues le han transformado el UFO en UAP, que sería eso, fenómenos aéreos no identificados.
Claro, pero el aéreo de alguna manera lleva implícito casi el tema militar ya también.
También sí.
Al
Y
llamarlo
aparte
aéreo,
no hace justicia a los avistamientos que también ha habido en el agua.
Sí.
Saliendo del agua. Se hablaba mucho de este tema, ahora ya no se habla nada de ese tema. Bueno, pues no sé. No, esto es todavía publicidad. Vamos, están en los anuncios. Compre las nuevas galletas para astronautas. Máximo sabor, mínimo residuo. Porque luego para ir al baño no veas.
No, ahí no pueden. Tienen mal. Pues no sé. Yo la verdad que me deja un poco perplejo esto que estamos asistiendo hoy. O
Sí.
sea, cuando se hace tanta historia para decirte que es lo que más o menos veníamos viendo, que no iba a haber noticias, o que parecía que no iba a haber grandes noticias, o que simplemente te dan como un pellizquito de algo, como sí, te reconocemos que están.
Yo te leo cosas que han publicado
Pero
aquí en
no
el
sé.
periódico, de la
A ver.
reunión. A ver, cargar
Vamos a ver.
más. A ver. Tú si tú ves que empieza algo, me avisas y lo
Sí,
paramos.
yo estoy con ahí, estoy mirando.
Hace 8 horas. ¿Qué me estás contando, tío? Bueno, vale. 6 meses de análisis. El 24 de octubre de 2022 empezó el anuncio de que esto se iba a crear. Hay gente que ha hablado de julio, más pronto que o sea, parece que han empezado antes. Y los que incluyen este equipo son David Spergel, Ana María Berea, pero todo seguido se escribe Ana María Berea, Federica Bianco, Paula Bontempi, Reggie Brothers, Jen Bass, Nadia Drake, Mike Gold, David Greenspoon, Matt Mountain, Warren Randolph, Walter Scott, Joshua Semeter, Carlin Toner y Shirley Wright. Son 16 expertos de diferentes perfiles. Hemos reunido a algunos de los científicos más prestigiosos del mundo, profesionales de la ciencia de datos y expertos en seguridad aeroespacial para que puedan decirnos cómo estudiar este fenómeno, afirma Daniel Evans, uno de los impulsores. Voy a toser.
Tose. Uno de los impulsores. ¿Cuántos impulsores hay?
Uy, ¿qué ha pasado? Se me ha ido la noticia. Se me ha ido.
Has tosido y se te ha cerrado la página.
Sí.
Bueno, yo estoy, mira, ahora estoy viendo un tuit que ha puesto Josep Guijarro y que yo creo que estoy completamente de acuerdo con lo que él dice. Pero un poco en la línea de lo que estábamos contando, dice Josep, si dicen que los UAPs son observados a la altitud de los vuelos civiles o militares, es decir, atmosféricos, ¿por qué tiene que investigarlos la NASA? ¿No es acaso una agencia espacial? Claro, porque de hecho ha dicho la NASA, la Paula Bontempi, la bióloga, ha dicho que debe ser la NASA la que tiene que estudiar estos fenómenos. Esto también es inquietante. No me vas a negar que es inquietante como diciendo, no, los que tenemos que llevar esto somos nosotros. Eso también, bueno, no sé. Y más cuando hay muchas entidades. Bueno, ya sabes que tenemos incluso los amigos de All Stars Academy, estos, o como se llame, o For Stars Academy.
To the Stars
Academy. Pues tenemos hasta estos, ¿no? Que esto es una especie de sociedad civil o asociación civil.
Sí.
Pero es curioso que sean los de la NASA los que se erijan como los máximos expertos y los que tienen que llevar estos casos. No lo sé.
Sí.
No lo sé.
A ver, te pongo más comentarios. Parece ser que José Antonio Caravaca ha seguido la retransmisión con Iker Jiménez. O sea,
¡Oh!
se han hecho videollamada o
Ha
algo.
tenido que ser
y-
interesante
Y
eso.
cuentan que por momentos se dormían. Que por momentos se dormían.
No me extraña.
Dice que los mensajes que hemos intercambiado por el momento permanecerán clasificados por seguridad nacional.
Claro,
Dice
lo que sí,
Caravaca.
mira, por
Pero ha
ejemplo,
puesto muchos tweets Caravaca de temas que él ha estado al tanto, parece. Y, por ejemplo, NASA, nuestra prioridad para esta transmisión es describir cómo estudiar los UAP desde una perspectiva científica, pero no estamos revisando ni evaluando observaciones no identificables ya recopiladas. Otra. Bueno, parece ser que hay mucho salseo en el chat del directo de la NASA. Tremendo, de conspiranoicos y tal que están metidos ahí. Pues eso también sería interesante seguirlo. Otra, dice Nicola Fox, el
¿queréis
acoso...
verlos? Los puedo poner.
El acoso no solo conduce a una mayor estigmatización del campo de los UAP, obstaculizando... Todos estos temas ya sí que los hemos tratado nosotros. El doctor David Greenspoon dice, las firmas tecnológicas extraterrestres se mantuvieron a distancia en la NASA debido a un estigma. Ahora no lo son. Las mismas lecciones ahora deberían aplicarse a los UAP. Bueno, pues ahí hay unos cuantos mensajitos interesantes.
No sé, la verdad
Pero
que
no han dicho nada, ¿eh? No han
es
dicho
extraño.
nada. O sea, han
Es
dicho
extraño.
cositas, es lo que yo pensaba, pero que me parece bien, ¿eh? Han dicho cositas así como deslizando, no se cierran en banda al tema extraterrestre, eso es algo bonito, por lo menos. Serían necios, y si son científicos no se pueden cerrar. También han dicho
Vale.
que... Dime.
Y en este titular, mira, esto lo han dicho ellos. ¿Vale? Necesitamos más evidencias para resolver el misterio de los ovnis en Estados Unidos.
Sí, sí.
¿Eso no te suena a que está pidiendo dinero al gobierno?
No. Están pidiendo dinero.
Ah,
O sea,
vale.
no es que no me suene, es que ellos abiertamente están pidiendo más ayudas, más interés, están
Sí,
pidiendo
sí.
la participación.
Más
no
recursos.
no dicen dame pasta, pero con sus palabras, con
Enséñame
su
la pasta.
lenguaje, con su retórica, sí lo dice. Sí. Totalmente. O sea que
La verdad
sí.
que, no sé, es interesante. Yo creo que, a ver qué es lo que dicen ahora, que yo tengo ahora curiosidad. Pero vamos, no sé, a ver qué es lo que
Yo lo
van a
que quiero
decir.
es que digan unas conclusiones, digamos, sólidas, que nos hagan un poco... Tienen que ser buenos vendedores y deben dejarte con ganas de la escena post créditos, ¿sabes? Entonces, deben hacerlo de una forma, es decir, atractiva, aunque sea un tema científico.
Yo no sé, yo estoy alucinado porque estoy leyendo algunos resúmenes y la verdad es que no creo que nos hayamos perdido gran cosa porque al final
No, también es verdad que a ver quién te ha tenido los bemoles de seguirlo.
Todo. Claro.
Ni siquiera los periodistas, porque yo estoy viendo los resúmenes que hacen y son cosas que ya sé yo en los 30 primeros minutos que hemos estado. Yo creo que la gente ha estado muy a tope al principio. Después ha habido una laguna y que
Bueno,
hasta los
sí.
propios americanos se han aburrido. Y
Pero sí,
ahora
lo
vuelve.
estaban ofreciendo en Telemundo.
Ay, pero hay que buscar si lo vuelven a poner.
No,
que
no,
lo
lo han
mismo-
cortado, no lo han vuelto a poner más. O sea, ni en el directo de Telemundo han dicho, anda ya. A no ser que lo pongan ahora. Voy a echar un vistazo.
Va, tú echa un vistacillo ahí, sí.
A ver si lo veo, ¿vale?
Estamos ahí
Vamos
a punto a 5 minutos de que empiece, de que den el pitido inicial a la final de la Europa League, de
A
la
ver.
antigua UEFA. Yo siempre voy a decir la UEFA. Porque ya...
Sí, la UEFA, tío. Eso es así.
Pues a ver si termino de editar esto ya de una santísima. Le estoy poniendo las músicas al programa. Luego saldrá el programa trambólico, ya verás. Porque no estoy escuchando nada.
Trambólico. Pues mira, ahora en Telemundo están retransmitiendo. Es que Telemundo está muy bien, ¿eh? A mí
Podemos hacer un día
me gusta
comentarios
mucho
de
esta.
Telemundo, ¿eh?
Sí, a mí me gusta mucho. Yo cuando estuve en Estados
A ver,
Unidos.
parece que empieza.
Que era, claro. Parece.
A ver, pon la
Y-
música.
Voy, perdón.
Nada, es promoción.
No, de momento no. Pues Telemundo es una cadena estadounidense que bueno, pues que emite en castellano, en español, en este caso. Y la verdad que está muy bien, porque para enterarse de lo que pasa en Estados Unidos de una manera un poquito así interesante, además molan sus programas matinales, pues están todos llenos de música cubana y cosas así. A mí me mola bastante, me mola un
Qué
montón.
bueno.
Y sí, yo es lo que cuando estuve en Estados Unidos es lo que veía para enterarme un poco de lo que pasaba. Y no, de momento no, están en directo, veo que están en directo. Ahora mismo están haciendo una rueda de prensa de la Casa Blanca, están con eso. O sea que de momento no tenemos directo. No tenemos directo de lo de los ovnis.
Pues lo seguiremos intentando pinchar.
Sí, pero voy a ver si encuentro en algún canal. Crear. Bueno, ahora mismo está en directo. Digo esto. A ver, yo qué sé. ¿Tú crees que si pinchamos uno de aquí nos van a tirar el vídeo?
¿De dónde?
Del mundo.
¿Pero están con esto de la NASA? No.
Sí.
No nos lo tiran el vídeo. Lo que pasa es que no podemos, una vez terminemos este directo, se autodestruirá. Pero yo creo que no nos lo van a tirar. Y si no, nos vamos a Twitch, que ahí vale todo. Eso es como aguas internacionales, Twitch.
A ver, vamos a ver, voy a ver si esto. ¿Es tu directo? A ver si.
A ver.
Espera un momento, ¿eh? No, que tú no puedes ver todavía. Estoy viendo si está en castellano, porque el mundo a lo mejor lo ha pinchado igual que nosotros.
Pues lo mismo.
No, lo ha pinchado tal cual y no están traduciendo nada.
Ah, vale, pues nada, que les den. Con todo el respeto del mundo.
Hemos hecho lo mismo que el mundo. Para que veas tú que al
Pues
final.
ya está. Si lo hace Telemundo, no lo voy a hacer yo. Hal.
No, el mundo.
Ah, el mundo.
El mundo. Sí. Madre mía. Pues nada. Parece ser que no.
Menos 30.
Bueno, pues vamos a ver. Estamos ahí esperando, estamos expectantes a que.
Venga,
a que den
chavales,
ya...
Doctor Joel. Bueno, pues nos quedamos tú y yo
Doctor
aquí
Joel
hasta que-
Hurowitz.
Ahí. Pues ya te digo, voy a ver si consigo abrir. Bueno, ahora pediré que me traigan la cena, ¿no? Que me traigan la cena aquí y como guarrísimamente mientras hablamos de estos temas. Pues claro,
¿Vas a comer y todo?
Señores de la NASA, hombre, depende de lo que tarden en volver y eso, y en empezar con la... Bueno, empiezan en 2 minutos en teoría y de lo que dure la rueda de prensa. Bueno, ahora decimos como muchísimo una cosa loca y si está interesantísimo me quedo hasta las 10. 9 a 10.
Claro.
Como una cosa de decir, madre mía, es que no parpadees que te pierdes algo. Pero como sea...
No parpadees.
Como sea un rollazo, te digo que a la media hora nos piramos. Que seguro que cuando nos piremos mejora.
Vale, a ver.
Capaz.
Estoy viendo, estoy investigando en los canales nacionales.
A ver si
lo
alguno...
podemos lograr.
Vale.
A ver, puede ser.
A ver.
En La Vanguardia esto está...
La Vanguardia le gusta, y ABC también, todo el tema de ciencia. A ver.
Escuchar.
Tengo aquí esto.
No,
Bueno,
pero nadie está traduciendo nada, ¿no?
Pues te digo, los trending topics son... Vuelve a ser NASA. La NASA es trending topic. La NASA.
Yo recomiendo una canción que se llama, de Pablo Carbonell, El último mono de la NASA. Es muy chula. Sí. Es una versión del Space Oddity, muy tipo Space Oddity.
Mira, dice... A ver, ponla. Bueno, no la puedes poner porque
no la puedo poner.
Nos desmantelan todo.
Ya la pondré otro día, pero que es muy chula. La tenéis que buscar.
Vale, la buscaremos.
A ver.
Menos 30. No, te digo porque en el blog de José Antonio Caravaca ya ha puesto él una primera aproximación a los resultados de esta reunión, ¿no? de esta historia. Entonces lo vamos a...
¿Qué dice?
Lo vamos a retuitear ya lo he hecho yo y le vamos a ver. con la cuenta de... No, vale. Pues mira, dice, a ver,
¿Quieres encender
¿sale
las
esto o
luces
no
ya?
sale? No, no sale. Vale, si sale me cortas y me dices, Álvaro, ya está eso, que no estoy mirando la pantalla.
No, que va a
Recién
salir.
terminada la comparecencia de 4 horas de los 18 expertos de la NASA, quedan claras algunas cosas. El famoso organismo que ha estado varios meses trabajando en la cuestión no ha investigado ningún caso OVNI, ni pretende hacerlo en un futuro. NASA dice, 2 puntos, nuestra prioridad para esta transmisión es describir cómo estudiar los UAP desde una perspectiva científica, pero no estamos revisando ni evaluando observaciones no identificables ya recopiladas. Dan Evans, es nuestra responsabilidad colectiva investigar estos sucesos en el riguroso escrutinio científico que merecen. La ciencia se basa en evidencias, en el análisis, requiere la capacidad de reproducir los fenómenos y, por encima de todo, objetividad. No tenemos una agenda. El objetivo principal de este increíble equipo de expertos no es ver vídeos borrosos de fenómenos aéreos, sino darnos un mapa para análisis futuros. La NASA es transparente. Hacen especial hincapié en que no hay incidentes dignos de mencionar. Hay muy pocas observaciones de alta calidad y un archivo claro de estos fenómenos. La información que se obtiene de los testigos con frecuencia es confusa y no nos permite el análisis adecuado de los fenómenos. Ojo a esto. Ya echándole la culpa a los testigos. Y es que no hay un vídeo bueno y una foto buena de un ovni. Ya todo el mundo tiene teléfonos móviles, lo que dice todo el mundo, ¿no? Bueno, es que a lo mejor el fenómeno no quiere dejarse fotografiar con claridad y no quiere que tampoco tú llegues a ninguna conclusión. Por eso los testigos se pueden llegar a mostrar relativamente confusos. Porque ¿qué he visto? ¿Qué acabo de ver en los cielos? Pues vete a saber. Vete a saber. ¿Qué más? Abren la posibilidad a que todos los fenómenos no resueltos hasta el momento se deban a causas prácticamente explicables en el futuro si consiguen establecer una correcta metodología. Su definición de los fenómenos no es al azar. Dado que los UAP pueden ser cualquier cosa en nuestros cielos, en el agua o en el espacio, decimos fenómenos anómalos no identificados en lugar de objetos voladores no identificados para proporcionar un lenguaje más inclusivo sobre los tipos de informes presentados al gobierno. Es decir, quitan lo de objeto y así la gente no se confunde con que a lo mejor no es algo material. Los expertos de la NASA creen que muchos de estos avistamientos no son ni siquiera objetos físicos y que podrían encubrir algunos fenómenos lumínicos de la naturaleza, desconocidos, por lo que es más apropiado hablar de fenómenos anómalos y quitar incluso el aspecto de aéreo. Los únicos comentarios reseñables hasta una evaluación más profunda son estos, según Caravaca. El director de AARO, el Kirkpatrick que es el calvo, observamos estas esferas metálicas en todo el mundo y las vemos haciendo maniobras aparentes muy interesantes. No sé si eso no está bien traducido, Caravaca. Dr. David Ginsburg dice, las firmas tecnológicas extraterrestres, ya lo hemos contado, se mantuvieron a distancia en la NASA debido al estigma. Ahora no lo son. Las mismas lecciones ahora deberían aplicarse a los UAP. Y la frase del Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, del calvo, los casos de UAP realmente anómalos suman entre un 2 y un 5% del total de 800 casos, número total actualizado, que han analizado, lo que sería entre aproximadamente 16 a 40 casos de UAP con características anómalas, que ya está, son pocos a lo mejor, pero ya está bien decir que hay 16-40 casos que no tienen una explicación aparente. No es moco de pavo tampoco. Bueno,
no sé,
pues
la verdad que se hace complicado.
Pero yo no sé si van a volver o ponen aquí la televisión esta en bucle.
No lo sé. La verdad que está siendo algo un poco desconcertante. Sí. Tú sabes aquellas cosas que a veces pasan en estas cosas de yo qué sé, de la política, estas cosas que pasan del mundo de la conspiración, que a veces hay más de lo que no dicen que por lo que están diciendo, ¿no? Y yo creo que el análisis va a tener que ser este. O sea, el análisis que nos va a llevar tiempo, porque intentar extraer algo de todo esto va a ser una auténtica locura. Pero yo creo que el análisis tiene que hacerse así. Es decir, qué es lo que no dicen, qué es lo que queda entre líneas, ¿no? Y veremos a ver.
Claro.
Veremos a ver. Yo no sé. La verdad que me deja alucinado. O sea, y qué pensarán de ello, ¿no? Muchos astronautas, porque hay que decir que muchos astronautas han tenido encuentros con lo desconocido, muchos de ellos. Y han visto cosas bueno, han visto pues, naves incluso entrar en la atmósfera. Eso ha pasado. Y de los que quedan vivos de esta gente, ¿qué es lo que podrán decir? ¿Qué es lo que dirán? ¿Qué es lo que pensarán de esta postura de la NASA? Que ahora de repente todos sean básicamente objetos terrestres. Porque, a ver, se decía, cuando nos han enseñado Álvaro esa diapositiva en la que todos iban, esos UAPs, iban en la misma altura que los aviones comerciales, lo que te están diciendo al final es que es terrestre. Es que eso no viene de fuera.
Bueno, no tiene por qué. Pero bueno, sí, nos recuerda más a algo terrestre, pero no tiene por qué, porque si están en las mismas capas que los aviones, a lo mejor es porque a eso les interesa los aviones. Les interesa estudiar. ¿Qué sabemos? Pero... Y si fueran objetos espía, tampoco tiene mucho sentido. Te paras a pensarlo, ¿eh?
Pues podemos hacer un experimento, claro, no creo que tengamos aquí el mapa ese que salía en qué zonas se les solía encontrar más, en qué zonas habían, que eran las dos costas.
A ver, lo tengo yo aquí, pero no te lo puedo pinchar, pero te lo puedo ver. A ver, no sé si lo encuentro. A ver, claro, yo de geografía tampoco ando muy...
Espérate, ¿lo tienes ahí en el escritorio o algo así?
Sí.
Vale, pues envíamelo al correo.
¿Sí?
Sí, vamos a hacer.
Vale. A ver. Agregar. Ah, no. Otra vez este. Me cago en la leche. Fuera, coño.
Esto es como el anuncio de la batamanta por la noche, sale muchas veces.
Mejor llama a Kiko. A ver.
Mejor llama a Kiko, ese es el Kiko, sí.
¿Pero
Sí,
por
sí.
WhatsApp te lo mando, por ejemplo? O...
Bueno,
por
vale,
por
venga,
email
por WhatsApp.
prefieres.
Por email mejor, al de siempre.
Vale.
Ese que empieza por I y acaba por un cordón.
Sí, ya, me imagino.
No sé.
A ver.
Que hay otros. Es que tengo... Yo soy muy fan de una de las teorías de los ovnis y es la vinculación con lo nuclear, con las centrales nucleares. A mí esa vinculación
Pero eso
es
es
algo
difícil
que
de establecer con el mapita chiquitillo ese que nos han puesto.
Bueno, pero sí que podemos saber, hay mapas de donde hay más centrales nucleares. Lo mismo no. Pero yo quería comprobarlo como mínimo.
Yo te la paso.
En las dos costas de Estados Unidos, en la parte de Japón, Corea.
Ya la tienes.
Ahí puede ser. Vale.
¿A quién se lo he enviado?
A ver.
Sí, a Isra, sí.
Vale, digo, a ver si...
Vale. Es que lo he puesto tan automático y tengo ya tanto cansancio que no sé a quién se lo he enviado eso.
Tiene tanto dominio.
Venga,
tanto
NASA,
dominio de esto.
espabila.
Madre mía.
Astrobiology.
Qué desastre.
Oh. Aquí no han estado puntuales. Se ve que están ya cansados también ellos. Han dicho, párate. Que tengo que dar al funeque.
Para ya. Están así.
No empiezas todavía, que no. A ver.
Vale. Estoy aquí. Vale, guardar una copia. Vale, vamos a ver si soy capaz. Esto ya es más complicado. No os vayáis, que estáis diciendo. ¿Qué momentos más tensos?
A ver. No complicado esto, me cago en la leche. Nos hubiéramos hecho
a ver, que
de Telemundo.
Vuelven. Ah, no, ostras, Kennedy. Mira, voy a hacer una cosa. Voy a sacarlo un momento, ahora cuando estoy atento, ¿eh?
Vale.
Vale, que si no, no puedo. Vale. A ver, aquí. Vale, esto es lo que os estaba comentando.
Vale.
Bueno,
a ver.
se ve súper pequeño, pero yo no sé si lo puedo hacer más grande. Parece que no. Bueno. Vale, pues lo que estábamos viendo, ¿ves? Tenemos el mapa nos reportaba, nos decía que teníamos en las dos costas,
Vale.
en una zona muy curiosa de África, ¿te das cuenta? Justamente abajo, ¿eh?
Sí.
¿Vale? Aquí en la mitad, en la zona de Oriente Medio,
Sí.
hay mogollón, y en la parte de Corea-Japón, ¿vale?
Sí,
Entonces,
Corea-Japón, sí, sí.
entonces ahora lo voy a quitar esto, voy a quitar esto, y bueno, mi pregunta es, ¿tendrá que ver con mi teoría absurda? Pues a lo mejor no, pero voy a comprobarlo. Voy a ver dónde hay más centrales nucleares.
Estás pendiente de lo de YouTube, ¿eh?
Sí, estoy ahí, sí. Estoy ahí. Ahora
Vale.
detengo y
No empieza.
lo vuelvo.
Vale.
No, están ahí. Se están pensando. Sí. Vamos allá. Vale, aquí están. ¿Ves? Aquí tenemos. No sé qué está explicando este señor. Y yo también, mientras tanto, miraré si, como tú me dices,
No,
a ver si
lo tengo puesto, ¿eh? Por si acaso empezara.
en Telemundo también de repente conectan como han conectado antes.
¿Conectan ahora, dices? ¿O qué?
Estaría bien.
Ah.
No, que es lo que voy a mirar, a ver si. Hombre, se han conectado esta
Tú quieres
mañana.
poner el mapa
deberían
de
conectar.
el mapa de las centrales.
Sí, es una curiosidad. Mira, voy a ver. Mira, lo voy a buscar. Pues mira, te doy datos. Los tengo, ¿vale?
Dame datos.
Donde te digo los 5 países donde más centrales nucleares hay.
Vale.
¿Vale? Venga.
Ujú.
Primero Estados Unidos. Eso es evidente.
Bien, pues ahí
¿Vale?
hay
Francia.
muchos ovnis. Ahí hay muchos casos de ovnis.
Francia no hemos visto nada, por eso. Japón, tercera.
Ujú.
Rusia, Alemania y República de Corea. O sea que ahí está la cosa,
Pues
¿eh?
oye, alguno encaja.
Algunos hemos acertado, otros quizás no, pero vamos, sí, lo que pasa, me falla el tema de Oriente Medio. Oriente Medio no, como que no.
Pero en Oriente a lo mejor hay armas nucleares. Sin haber
Sí,
muchas.
bueno,
Sin haber muchas.
vale, pues mira, voy a cambiar la búsqueda. Voy a buscar armas nucleares en el mundo, ¿vale? Vale, vamos a ver. Mira, los países que tienen más armas nucleares son, en primer lugar, Rusia. Luego Estados Unidos.
Pues en Rusia había, pero en la parte
sí,
más.
Sí. China, Francia
En la
y
parte
Reino
más
Unido,
oriental
Pakistán, India,
de
Israel
Rusia.
y Corea del Norte. Sí. Y luego otra cosa que no hemos hablado, que me extraña
Y
que
habría que ver
no lo
dónde hay
hayamos
también
hablado.
silos, simplemente instalaciones
Sí, también.
militares, silos de misiles.
¿Qué es lo que ha pasado esta noche con la alarma en Corea del Sur y en Japón?
Ah, no me he enterado.
Sí, ha sido algo. Es que son cosas que han pasado en las últimas 24 horas y a mí es algo que me ha dejado loco. O sea, bueno, esta madrugada, hora de aquí, digamos, en madrugada, hora de aquí, ha surgido una alarma. Se ha dicho de que, por ejemplo, Okinawa entera tenía que salir la gente e irse porque había una
Ajá.
alarma de un posible misil norcoreano. Y lo
Hostia,
mismo ha
pues
pasado en
eso
Corea del Sur.
Eso
Y al
cualquier día
final
pasa.
no ha sido. Mira, te voy a decir, para que veáis de qué hablo. Alarma nuclear Japón. Esto ha sido justo esta noche. Y claro, todo eso junto con esto te crea.
Me parece a mí que nos vamos a ir en breves, ¿eh? Porque estos no
No
sé si
sé.
van a poner nada más. No están cumpliendo con los horarios que dijeron. Y si no, nos enteraremos de todas formas, ¿eh? No, vamos a ir. Vamos a ir. ¿Esto qué es? Esto es un reportaje sobre...
Los neutrones.
Ah, pues a mí me gustaba la serie de Jimmy Neutron.
Joder,
Claro.
está muy chula. Bueno, no sé. Yo.
Nos vamos. Pero
Hacemos
vamos, de todas.
otro resumen otro día.
Claro.
De esto.
Y además que ahora hay que digerir un poco la información. Y de momento tenemos un cacao importante. No por nada, sino porque ellos mismos, no es que no hayan sido claros, es que han sido muy tibios. Muy tibios. Así que,
Sí.
hay que leer entre líneas, que es lo que yo ya me imaginaba, pero no tanto, no me esperaba tanto.
Mira, para que no os quedéis con con la noticia así a medias, os la leo para que veáis qué es lo que ha pasado justo esta noche. Alarma en Japón y Corea del Sur por un cohete espacial surcoreano. ¿Vale?
Ajá.
Norcoreano, perdón, norcoreano. El intento de puesta en órbita de un satélite norcoreano puso en alerta a la isla japonesa de Okinawa. ¿Vale? Okinawa es la isla de Karate Kid 3, que es donde nació Miyagi, ahí.
Vale.
Y a la capital de Corea del Sur, Seúl, en la madrugada de este miércoles. El vuelo terminó abruptamente en el mar, según ha informado el ejército surcoreano. Y sí ha habido bastante miedo esta noche. Yo no sé qué va a pasar con esta gente también. Y qué se va a hacer, porque lo de Corea del Norte es un tema complicadillo, ¿eh?
La verdad es que sí.
Sí.
Vamos a ponernos aquí porque el señor este está muy interesante, pero vamos, que no. Ya que nos vamos a despedir. Pues esto del pánico, bueno, pánico nuclear, del problema nuclear en un futuro o de si es algo por lo que preocuparnos y tal y hasta dónde puede llegar. Y luego también, eso es un tema para el programa, ¿eh? Y luego también otro tema es eso, intentar darle un poco la vuelta al discurso de lo que nos han contado hoy. Estos científicos muy herméticos no han querido pronunciar la palabra extraterrestre. Decían no humano, no humano, no humano. Chico, no humano. Claro, no se cierran que puedan ser también intraterrestres. Claro, no vaya a ser, dicen, vamos a decir no humano. Pero
Claro,
vamos,
es que
era un poco absurdo.
no sé, la verdad es que es un tema difícil. Un tema difícil porque ¿con qué información cuentan esta gente? Tampoco lo sabemos. Tampoco sabemos si cuentan con la misma información que tú que yo, si tienen una información parcial, si únicamente tienen, no sé, o si son unos mandados. Yo, la sensación, y ya he leído varios artículos y sigo con la sensación que simplemente ha sido una cosa hoy de pedir dinero. Una cosa de decir, oye, necesitamos
Dame
recursos.
pasta.
Exacto. No, ahora
Dame pasta.
que hay una crisis brutal, no vayáis a recortar, que si recortáis, no os decimos de dónde vienen los bombazos que nos van a enviar. Creo que viene por ahí la cosa. Pero aparte de eso, no lo sé. Y yo sí que creo, ¿eh? Antes me ha dicho, no, que no crees nada en los ovnis. Sí, yo sí. Lo que pasa es que creo...
Lo retiro, porque lo has explicado y lo has fundamentado muy bien.
Que creo que hay de todo, como en la viña del Señor. Hay de todo, Álvaro. Y no sé. La cuestión es que es complicado, es complicado. Yo siempre pienso que por muy científicos que seamos, pues la ciencia no lo puede explicar todo. Y de momento tampoco. Entonces, pues vamos a ver si esto nos lleva a algún sitio, qué significa. Yo voy a estar muy atento, sobre todo a los diarios los próximos días, porque esto va a causar cierta polémica, ya lo veréis. O sea, sin decir nada, sin tocar nada casi, esto va a empezar a levantar alfombras.
Yo creo que estos, y esto sabes que se va a hablar mucho de ello en el próximo Congreso de Ufología de Barcelona.
Sí,
Estoy segurísimo. Que siempre traen a personas, divulgadores autorizados, digamos, pero dentro del mundo ufológico. Bueno, excepto nuestro amigo Michio Kaku, que está más dentro del mundo científico. Pero a lo que voy, que suelen traer a gente que está muy al tanto de todo esto. Incluso algunos ponentes suelen ser norteamericanos, que es de donde viene la información. Yo no creo que sea desdeñable de decir, pues es que hoy nos han vendido la moto, nos han dicho nada más que tonterías, ha sido un aburrimiento. No, la conclusión, y terminamos ya con esto. Tienen tema para investigar. No querían no era el objetivo de esta charla dar una respuesta a qué son los ovnis. Voy a entrar por si acaso hay alguna actualización. Nada, sigue un señor ahí hablando.
Sí, lo estoy viendo yo en pantalla.
No.
Y tú lo tendrías que ver siempre.
Vale, sí. Pues lo que te digo, que hay casos. Conclusión, 1, quieren quitar el estigma de lo que tiene que ver con los ovnis.
Correcto.
El miedo que tienen algunos científicos, algunos pilotos militares o pilotos comerciales y civiles incluso, a hablar de esto. Lo que pasa es que para ello hay que divulgar con sensatez, desde el método científico, quitarle el estigma ese de que son naves ni de que son extraterrestres, pero que sí que hay fenómenos anómalos. Incluso le quieren quitar el de aerial, lo de aéreo. Fenómenos anómalos, la mayoría en la atmósfera. A mí la primera diapositiva, no me extraña que la gente haya seguido con más interés. La primera me parece la mejor, la del mapa. Suelen ser redondos. Suelen medir entre 1 y 4 metros. Suelen ser blancos, plateados o translúcidos. Pueden estar estacionados o pueden estar en marcha.
Te estamos escuchando mal
No.
ahora, Álvaro. Debe ser, has abierto otra pestaña o algo así y ya sabes que esto es muy sensible.
Sí, puede ser. Bueno, vale, pues no pasa nada. Espera, cierro. No sé qué estaba haciendo. ¿Me oyes mejor ahora o no?
No, ahora no. Pero esto
Vale.
vuelve enseguida.
Vale.
Ahora sí, perfecto.
A ver.
Ya está, perfecto.
Nada, bueno, simplemente que tienen casos OVNI, que los tienen que seguir recopilando, que quieren empezar a sentar las bases para el estudio serio de esto, que quieren que esto se deje de tomar a cachondeo o con miedo a que me manden al psicólogo, etcétera. Que quieren seguir recopilando, que no descartan, no se ha descartado hoy de ninguna manera, aunque que consideran que no tienen pruebas para decir ni lo más mínimo sobre la palabra extraterrestre, no. Sin embargo, no es extraterrestre, tampoco parece, algunos de los casos, ese 5% que son verdaderamente anómalos, tampoco parece que sean humanos, por tanto, habrá que ver qué son. Y en ese que son, están muy interesados los científicos a que sean fenómenos meteorológicos, lumínicos, que sean... Fíjate si desde aquí lo importante era, como poníamos en Twitter nosotros, quieren ampliar las fronteras de la ciencia y lo quieren hacer a través de la investigación de los ovnis. Ahora, si piensan que son humanos y, como dice Isra, quieren dinero para investigar al enemigo, o están diciendo desde aquí, oye, en pro de la ciencia, no te importe que derribemos tu globo, no te importe que derribemos tus historias, porque es en pro a favor de la ciencia.
Está
Eso
muy
puede
buena,
ser otra lectura muy interesante y una vuelta de tuerca sobre lo que nos han contado hoy. Pero como digo, se volverá a hablar, se seguirá hablando y sobre todo hay que digerir. Seguro que estos días hay traducciones. Además, para que tenga estómago, cuando se suba el vídeo, si alguien lo sube aparte, porque claro, el problema es que la tele de la NASA es todo de corrido, es 24/7. Pero si alguien sube el vídeo de la conferencia de hoy, que han sido 4 horas, luego sí puede tener subtítulos automáticamente generados en castellano, ¿no? Eso
Sí.
Y lo vamos a ver.
Sí lo veremos, sí.
Si hay algo más interesante de contaros, os lo contaremos, porque os digo un secreto, dentro de muy poco va a estar con nosotros aquí José Antonio Caravaca por el libro que ha sacado de los ovnis de Julio Verne, que nos va a contar ovnis en la época victoriana, que es un tema chulísimo y estará con nosotros en Ecos, probablemente la semana que viene, que nos toca directo. Y ahí le preguntaremos, hola Antonio, ¿qué opinas aparte de lo que has puesto en el blog? Y que nos haga un resumen. Así que nada, Isra, nos vamos. Este domingo, límite 48 horas. Seguid ahí descargando y escuchando el de Jesús Callejo, que quedó muy bonito. Puse ahí el audio ese tan bonito de Constantino Romero, del replicante este que dice: visto cosas que vosotros no creeríais.
Hombre.
Naves arder más allá de Orión. Todo esto. Bien, escuchadlo y seguidnos. Hoy nos hemos dado un buen panzón, amigo. A descansar.
Hasta luego. Venga.
Chao.
Vaya bien. Adiós.